It's 7 p.m. Let me call to order the meeting of the Merrimack Planning Board for Tuesday, February 6th, 2018. Let me remind everyone who will address the board to be sure and sign in on the clipboard that's at the end of the counter here, and make sure your microphone's turned on and to speak clearly into them. Let me appoint both of our alternates into voting positions tonight for Mike and for Desiree. Let me also offer two other announcements. We've received communication from Desiree Fault that she is relocating her residence to Manchester and therefore has to resign her position from our board. Obviously, that's not a happy time for us because she's been a great friend and a great board member. Her term would normally have been up this summer anyway, but that will leave us with a vacant full-time position until such time as someone comes forward with some interest in that. The other announcement that I want to offer is that it's my intention to exercise the chair's discretion and reorder the agenda so that we handle all the continuances that we've got before us first, and then item number 8 as the first substantive application so that we get the simple guy out of the way, and then we'll hear the other two, which probably will have some more lengthy discussions. And that should give us the most efficient conduct of business here today. So if you're keeping score at home, the agenda will go 1, 2, 4, 6, 7, 8, 3, 5. Everybody remember that? Repeat it back. Robert, Planning and Zoning Administrator's report. Do you have anything for us tonight?
Yeah, there's a memo in your packet. That's the staff recommendation on the Tech NH site plan is that there is no regional impact.
What's the will of the board with respect to the potential for regional impact of the tech transport application?
Mr. Chairman, I make a motion we accept the staff's recommendation. This will not have any regional impact.
Is there a second for Alistair's motion? Second. Nelson had his hand up first. We'll have Nelson as the second. Any discussion? All in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Any abstaining? Okay, so we support the staff's recommendation that project is not a regional impact. Robert, is there anything else?
No, Mr. Chair.
I forgot to mention during my portion that our next board meeting is February 20th, 2018.
Could I also ask you to remind us all that we have a walk round on the property at the bottom of Merrimack Outlet thing, that village thing on this Saturday starting at 9 o'clock.
Okay, so that's a site walk at 10 Premium Outlets Boulevard for that project. And we're all going to gather on 10 Premium Outlets Boulevard, right where the fire lane takes off of that road, and go from there to look at whatever it is we choose to see. 9 o'clock?
9 o'clock.
9 o'clock on Saturday. And Robert, there's a need to publish that agenda or post that agenda so that'll come out?
It has been. It is posted.
It has been posted.
Okay.
So
Excellent.
it's on their board.
Thank you for the reminder.
Which is why I remembered it.
You know, I knew that it was out there on one of our Saturday mornings, but didn't have which one in mind. Anything else, Robert? Is there anything for members of the board for the staff? Okay.
I will not be present for that 10th meeting.
The site walk? Okay. Okay, with that in mind, let's move on to the next agenda items, which is, once it's reordered, dealing with some continuances. The first item is Agenda 4, Synergy Self-Storage LLC, as the applicant and owner, continued review for acceptance and consideration of a waiver of full site plan review for modifications to the previously approved site plan regarding access and parking. The parcel is located at 403 Daniel Webster Highway in the I-1 Industrial Aquifer Conservation and Elderly Housing Overlay Districts. A portion of the parcel is located in the Flood Hazard Conservation Districts. It is tax map 4D3, lot 84-1, and it's been continued from October 17th and December 19th, 2017 Planning Board meeting. We have a request from the applicant indicating that he is working with his engineer to solve some of the problems that we have set him after solving, and needs some additional time to do that. I've also had a conversation with staff and who believes that the applicant is earnestly working towards solving those problems. With that in mind, what's the will of the board with respect to the applicant's request to continue to March 20th, 2018?
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to make a motion that we agree to that extension, but make it crystal clear this is the last extension he's going to get, because this is a problem that's been there for some time. He didn't stick to the original design, and I think enough time has passed that this should be resolved.
Okay. Is there a second for Alistair's motion? Second by Nelson. I'm inclined to support the continuance and a stern message to the applicant to get on with it. I'm not sure if I'm in love with the idea of saying that you can't have any more extensions because sometimes the world just doesn't always cooperate with you. But I do think that indicating that to the applicant that it's disfavored, and in addition, no matter what, we want a progress report on March 20th of what's been going on. That's my comment. It doesn't change the motion that's on the table unless the maker chooses to.
I will accept that. Can I change it to slightly say that we will not agree to a continuance on March the 20th. He has to appear before this board.
To provide a progress report. I
Yeah.
think that's fair. Nelson, does that comport with your second? Okay, so the motion is to continue to March 20th with the expectation that Mr. Ross and Synergy Self-Storage will appear and at least provide a progress report on that date. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstaining? That's 6-0-0 to grant that continuance. We also have a request for a continuance of items 6 and 7, which are the same applicant, the same parcel with two different proposals, and I think the applicants indicated they want to address some of the staff's concerns and do some other things. So let me first read them both into the record. Charles Morgan is the applicant and 526 DW Highway LLC is the owner. Review for acceptance and consideration of waiver of full site plan review for the addition of 76 outdoor vehicle storage parking spaces for use between November 1st and April 1st. The parcel is located at 526 Daniel Webster Highway in the C2 General Commercial and Aquifer Conservation Districts and Wellhead Protection Area, Tax Map 5D2 Lot 1. The second item is Charles Morgan, applicant, and 526 DW Highway as LLC is the owner. Review for acceptance and consideration of final approval for a site plan to construct 21,069 square foot single-story storage facility and two-bay auto detailing shop. The parcel is located at 526 Daniel Webster Highway in the C2 General Commercial and Aquifer Conservation Districts and Wellhead Protection Area, Tax Map 5D2 Lot 1. Don't necessarily have to take them up and vote on them together, but I think that we can. The applicant is both looking to identify and resolve some of staff's concerns about the project, as well as potentially present the two items as a single site plan, which I think makes some sense too.
Makes sense.
I will recuse myself from voting on the item even as a continuance and later, but for the efficiency of the meeting, I don't mind sort of calling for the vote and continuing to chair. Unless there's
Mr.
some
Chairman, I
objection.
make a motion that we continue this to April the 3rd.
April the
The
3rd.
3rd meet at 7 p.m. in this room without any further notification to abutters.
Is there a second for Alistair's motion? Second by Paul. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstaining? I'll count myself as abstaining, so that is 5-0-1 to continue that item. Both of those items, I'm sorry, items 6 and 7. With that, that brings us back to the more substantive portion of our agenda. And at item 8, Tech NH Inc. as the applicant and RPR Realty LLC as the owner. Review for acceptance and consideration of final approval for a site plan to construct an 11,200 square foot building addition. The parcel is located at 10 Continental Boulevard in the I-1 and Aquifer Conservation Districts, flood hazard and wellhead protection areas, tax map 3D lot 2. Robert, is there anything that we need to know before we hear from the applicant?
No, Mr. Chair.
With that, let's have the applicant come forward. Oh, I'm sorry, in reordering the agenda, I messed up the easel choreography. Sorry about that. Are you ready?
Good evening, board. My name is Brent Cole. I'm a professional engineer with Keach Nordstrom Associates, and I'm not. Button says it's on.
You may be on, but bring it closer and also just speak louder. The microphone really helps the people at home more than us. But
I'm here tonight representing Tech New Hampshire. Tech New Hampshire is a custom plastic injection molding company that specializes in medical supplies. The company began back in 1982. They quickly moved to Merrimack, and that's where they've flourished for the last 30 years. The company is at 8 and 10 Continental Boulevard. 8 Continental Boulevard is where the engineer, sales, machinists, and technicians reside. To the west, and the subject parcel, is 10 Continental Boulevard, where their storage warehouse is. The company is looking to expand the storage warehouse because they are simply out of space. They're proposing a 11,200 square foot addition to the west of the existing warehouse. The warehouse will reside where an existing parking lot and travelway exists today. We will relocate the driveway, but we will not be reconstructing any parking. The Tech New Hampshire doesn't require a lot of parking on this site. Most of the parking is on the other site where all the engineers and technicians are. They really only have about 2 to 3 employees that permanently work in the storage warehouse, so the 16 existing spaces on the site are plenty for them. We are showing 15 additional spaces for future use because we have the room. So if they ever need those spaces, they can stripe them. Those future spaces are towards the north, towards Naticook Brook. The parcel is located within the industrial zone. It is also located within the wetland overlay district, the flood hazard, and the aquifer overlay district. We did meet with the Conservation Commission last night, and that did go well. They had one comment about nitrogen fertilizer that we could easily amend a few notes. The wetlands on site are located to the north of the property where the Naticook Brook is. There is a steep slope from the north edge of pavement down to that brook. We will not be impacting any of that slope or any of the adjacent wetlands. In order to accommodate the additional pavement, which is about 10,000 square feet, we've added an infiltration pond to the westernmost part of the property. We're able to nestle a little pond in between the pavement and the property line. This infiltration pond will take in about 17,000 square feet. That includes the addition. It will discharge in all the stormwater into the ground up to the 50-year storm. So there'll be no stormwater leaving that pond that head down to the steep slopes until about the 100-year. We're also reducing all peak discharge flows around the site as well. We will need 3 waivers tonight. Relief from the architectural standards for an uninterrupted facade of over 200 feet. We will need a waiver from a paved pedestrian way along Continental Boulevard, and another waiver, which was a little bit of a late addition. I think it should be in your packets, but it was for a driveway separation for the relocated drive. Mr. Chair, I can get into those now, or we can go through questions first, or however you want to handle it.
let's deal with those a little bit later because our first order of business is accepting the application as complete.
Mhm.
And I don't know whether the board has enough information at this point to do that or has some questions or wants some more presentation. What's the will of the board with respect to the question of completeness? Nelson?
I just have a question, Mr. Chairman, of the applicant. He mentioned a detention area on the west side, and I see here on the plan, I think that's the stormwater management area that's shown on the plan. Is that
Yeah, the
Is that what
stormwater
you-
management area is
is
actually,
that what you meant by
it's an
it?
infiltration.
There's no outflow from that, no overflow, or
There's an overflow that'll be constructed, but the stormwater doesn't reach that until the
Yeah.
100-year storm event.
okay, the overflow doesn't seem to show on my plan. Show me where it is.
So you can see that.
You gotta either take the microphone with you or. I'm sorry to be the microphone police, but nobody can hear you at home without one.
So there's a strip of stone along the bottom of the.
Okay.
There's a strip of stone along the bottom of the infiltration pond.
Yeah.
At the northernmost, there's a 10 by 10 rectangle. That's the outlet of the stormwater pond.
Is it piped to the wetlands?
There's no pipe whatsoever. It's just an earthen berm. So as stormwater fills up, it'll go over the berm.
And just sheet flow then?
Sheet flow over the. We didn't want to do any sort of point discharge to these steep slopes to try to prevent erosion.
Okay, I just didn't see it, and
Yep.
that's why it isn't there.
I appreciate
Thank
it.
you.
No problem.
Thank you for going through the explanation. Other questions or comments? Is the board prepared to consider the question about whether the application is complete and ready for review?
Mr. Chairman, I make a motion that we have enough information to make an intelligent decision, and therefore we'll accept this matter for review.
Is there a
I'll
second? Second by Lynn Christensen. Any discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstaining? We are now 700 for, to determine that it's complete. Does the board have any questions of the applicant with respect to the project in general or his waivers? Yes, Dan?
Can you talk a little bit about is it a single driveway, just that driveway right there going into the facility?
The facility has two driveways.
Okay.
To the right of the building, it has one, and it'd like to keep 360-degree access because it does receive deliveries.
Was going to be my next question. How do you foresee the traffic flow through that facility with deliveries and?
So it'll remain the same right now, if I may.
Hang on to the microphone,
Yeah,
I
just keep it
would.
with you.
If you can turn to your existing conditions. You can see that the site has travelway around the entire building right now. That will essentially remain the same while we just relocate a little further to the west. The delivery trucks enter here, they have space to maneuver, and then they leave the site going that way.
Thanks.
So the waiver related to driveway separation is because that driveway, when you relocate it, is going to be too close to the one at, 12 Continental Boulevard?
The driveway today is actually too close to that driveway. It doesn't meet your regulations. So we're in a little bit of a catch-22 in this situation. We have to be 150 feet from any driveway, even across the street. Right now, we are 135 feet from the one to the west and only 70 feet to the one across the street. Once we switch that, we're now 135 feet for the one to the east and only 70 feet to the one to the west. In my professional opinion, I think conflicting left turns is the more serious issue. So moving it away from the driveway across the street is actually better. I think it's more nearly conforming to the intent of the regulation. But because the driveway is non-conforming today and it'll continue to be a non-conformance, we requested a waiver.
Do you, you explained the way that your truck traffic will go around the building that way, so that side is, at least for truck purposes, an exit rather than an entrance. Do you plan to sign that one so that it is actually restricted for exit only?
We did not have planned, right now it's two-way. We wanted to keep it two-way.
Okay.
I don't believe the applicant is opposed to it, but we'd like to enjoy two-way access that side.
I agree with your logic as it stands with respect to moving it in the direction that you are. Kind of, if there is any conflict now, it becomes less so. But certainly, if you made it an exit only, you wouldn't have any conflicting left turns related to the other driveway. So, I don't really feel strongly about it. I think your solution as it stands is as good as it is today, if not a little bit better. Other comments or questions? Nelson?
Yeah, a new question. It looks to me like the property to the east, is that a paved area? There's some kind of a something that's outlined.
Brick patio?
So, if I could answer that, Mr. Chair.
Please, yeah.
The property to the east is Tech New Hampshire. This is where the engineers reside, the technicians. These properties work together. It's a driveway that connects both of them. That's basically what you're seeing is a driveway. There's also a walkway in between. There's a patio where the employees enjoy lunch. These sites work hand in hand together.
Okay, it looks like a trespass. Okay,
Yep.
is that a paved area? What's
It is.
around the patio?
There is a paved area for. Show you. Paved area through here. This is
No,
where.
come down to where the patio is,
Yep,
right?
that's a paved walkway.
Yes, and when you step off the walkway, what do you step onto? Is that
The
a,
pavement.
It
That's
says
pa-
brick patio.
There's
there's a
brick
little
patio
brick
here.
patio?
Is it grass around the sides of the
There
walkway?
is. Yep.
The brick patio is like a little, what's the word?
Well,
A pagoda where people can sit and have lunch.
yeah, I'm trying to figure out what's around the patio.
Little tent
Is
there.
it grass?
Grass.
Yeah, okay, I
There
thought you
is.
said pavement at one point. Okay. I think I get it now, thank you.
Okay. Are there other comments or questions? Would you
Yeah.
like to, I'm sorry.
So this is two separate properties, right? That Tech NH doesn't own.
The owners of Tech New Hampshire own the two properties. I
Okay,
believe
so
one's in
our
his-
RPR Realty is the same organization or group, or?
Yep. One I believe is
Well,
his
same
wife.
people.
One is the LLC of.
I guess, because what I'm getting at is you've got two separate properties, two different buildings. You're going to make this one totally non-conforming as a standalone unit, arguing that all the business is done in the other building. And so if you ever abandon this building for some reason, it would not work well for someone else to go in and move there. They've got no parking, they've got, lots of space to work, but
And that's why we felt the need to provide the future spaces. There are 15 future spaces located to the north. So if someone wanted to come in and be the same exact warehouse, they could just paint those spaces and be in conformance with Merrimack
can you
standard.
point out where the future spaces are, please?
Are delineated right here.
Yeah.
So the existing 16 spaces are here, and then the dashed 15 spaces are up towards the north.
And how many spaces are you taking out?
We're taking out roughly, off the top of my head, I might as well look,
1, 2, 3.
15 and 24.
15 and 24. There's an abundance of spaces. A warehouse parking is not a high demand, but if someone were to put a warehouse, anything but a warehouse, they'd have to come for a change of use to this board. So.
Yeah, I get it, but you don't want to tear down the building for that. Okay.
I agree with that, although, and I think that there's some non-conformances related to the way the two properties work, as well as what they're asking for waivers of. But with respect to the parking, having 15 or 16 spaces and proposing 15 or 16 more to get to 30 or 31, where 30 is required, is a construct that we've regarded as being in compliance in the past.
Okay.
Not out of compliance.
I
For
just wanted the
this use.
discussion to come out. Thank you.
Okay. I think that the shared driveway between the two spaces is something that we've encouraged on commercial sites to reduce some of the flow back out onto the street as people move around a site. We have on occasion asked an applicant to merge two lots like this. I don't know if we would do that in this situation based on the fact that there's two separate buildings with the way that they're constructed, whether you could have one lot with all these buildings on them in a configuration like this.
But would it be normal to, given that they don't own either of the buildings,
Not within the company, no.
the company doesn't own them, they're effectively leasing, renting, whatever word you like to use. The owner of the property might not agree to that.
Might not, but the owner of the property is part of the applicant here today, so.
Yeah, okay.
And I'm not saying that we should. We usually don't, we usually look at that kind of thing when there's some reliance between the two for cross easements for certain things. And although they have some shared access, none of it is required as a cross easement to support their parking needs or their drainage needs or any of those kinds of things. They're simply joined for convenience, which two neighbors could do if they chose to. So, So I think I understand your request for the driveway proximity waiver. The building facade waiver seems fairly logical to me, since it's the rear facade of your building that isn't
I was
visible.
gonna say,
from
could
the
you
road.
have him talk about it just for the public's benefit?
Sure.
I mean, he hasn't said a word on it.
Would you like me to read it into the record, or just kind of give you a brief?
Tell us what you
brief
want.
overview?
Yeah, tell us what you're asking for a waiver for. And
So we're asking for a waiver of the section in your ordinance that refers to architectural standards and the length of an uninterrupted facade. You guys are trying to promote architecture and not have long industrial buildings with the same material for more than 200 feet. We have an existing building that already has, let's see here. I think it's about 160 feet of an existing building, and we're looking to add on another 80, making it 240, which exceeds your 200. To add an interruption at 2/3 of the building in the back wouldn't really make a lot of sense. I think you're trying to have Continental Boulevard look appealing, and really it's meant for the front of the building, which we do have an uninterrupted facade with the portion that jets out in the front. To have something interrupted like that wouldn't make sense for construction purposes. It just,
And I don't disagree with you, but I wanted to hear you say the back of the building, because it's not really clear usually when we're talking about facades, that we're talking about the back of the building. The rear-facing part of the building is what you're suggesting in your narrative is not going to be seen by the public. And
Correct.
so we might not care so much. And I think you make a good point. I just wanted to make that really clear to anybody in the public that's paying attention.
I appreciate it.
Thank you, Tom, and thank you for the explanation. Please go into whatever explanation you'd like the board to have with respect to your sidewalk waiver.
So we are asking the third and final waiver is for the sidewalk. There are sidewalks along Continental Boulevard. They just happen to be on the opposite side of the street. We understand that the town's trying to promote connectivity between parcels and to get down to the commercial uses near the highway, and we feel like the people from Tech New Hampshire can still do that by crossing the street and using that sidewalk. If we constructed a sidewalk along Tech New Hampshire, it would lead to nothing. They actually kind of have a sidewalk already, probably about 40 feet off the site, that leads to both driveways. It would just be an added expenditure that the project really can't handle at this point. If there happened to be a sidewalk on both sides, the applicant would consider it, but it just doesn't make sense to have a sidewalk dead end to nothing.
Okay. Before we get to take up the sidewalk waivers, I want to let the board have whatever chance it has for questions and answers, and then get some public input, if there is any. And then I think we can get to sort of motions and voting on things. Does the board have any other questions of the applicant in general? Lynn?
Is there any kind of a crosswalk from your property to the sidewalks on the opposite side?
I don't know where the crosswalk is, not along our frontage.
I don't think there's one in the vicinity.
There's no reasonable way to get across that street.
There isn't.
I wouldn't want people walking across that street under normal circumstances.
No, but part of the
Yeah, I know,
the
I-
reasoning is because there's sidewalks on the other side, but there's no way to get to them.
I get it.
Okay.
Other comments or questions by members of the board? Are there any abutters or citizens who wish to weigh in and offer the board anything to consider on this application? Going once, going twice, we'll close the public hearing. The first order of business for the board is to determine what it would like to do with any of the three waivers that the applicants requested. Since they have quite a bit of variability in them, it's probably wise to treat them separately. They don't really relate to each other in terms of the waivers. So let's deal with first the request for the building facade waiver. What's the will of the board with respect to that?
Mr. Chairman,
No, go ahead.
go on, Len.
No.
Ladies first.
By all
right,
means.
we'll recognize you, Alistair.
I make a motion that we agree to waive the requirement of the architectural standards on the basis that specific circumstances indicate the waiver will carry out the spirit and intent of the regulations.
Is there a second for Alistair's motion?
I'll second.
So.
All right, Lynn seconds. Any discussion? All in favor, say aye.
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 Any opposed? Any abstaining? 700 to grant that waiver. Let's take up the waiver related to the driveway proximity, and the applicant's asking for a waiver to allow a driveway within 70 feet of the westerly neighbor, whereas 150 feet is required.
Mr. Chairman, can I just ask one question? Given that, according to the testimony we've heard, the situation already exists, does he really need a waiver? I mean, is it not grandfathered in a way?
I think Robert could probably answer that one better than I can, but I think, in a sense, he's still making a movement that's closer to one and further from another. And Robert, what say you?
This came from actually a request from DPW that they request the waiver specifically on this one.
Okay.
So I would actually go through and grant the waiver, or at least go through the motion of it.
Okay, so I guess I only stated half of the waiver because part of it is 70 feet from the westerly neighbor, whereas 150 is required, but he's also 135 from the across the street neighbor, whereas 150 is required. Well, that's a strange one. What's the will of the board?
Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, I make a motion that we grant the waiver on the driveways on the basis that strict conformity would pose an unnecessary hardship to the applicant, and the waiver not be contrary to the spirit and intent of the site and the regulations.
Is there a second for Alistair's motion? Paul has a second. Any discussion? All in favor of granting the driveway proximity waiver, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstaining? 700 to grant that waiver. Third waiver request is the paved pedestrian way waiver. Any discussion on that item? Nelson?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, it looks to me like there is a sidewalk of sorts on the property close to the building. If I'm reading these plans correctly. And the thing is that I would be willing to accept that as a piece of sidewalk if there were pedestrian connections to the end of the property from there. In other words, in the future, as these other properties develop in different ways, we will have a path through there with a sidewalk that would be usable by the public or by others. I wonder if the applicant would consider that as an alternative. Yeah.
I think, the applicant noticed, and I think several of us may have noticed in our own review, that he's got this walkway in front of the building. And I think that for practical purposes, they're not going to rush out there and stop the public from using it. But it doesn't exist in a public easement, and it doesn't fall within the town's responsibility to plow it as it sits, which is one of the two key differences between this and a sidewalk. I'm not necessarily suggesting that we want the applicant to build a second paved pedestrian way that we now do have to plow and all of that. So I'm in favor of suggesting that this is a uniqueness to this property that makes it able to support the waiver. I'm not sure what we do if we start to blend what the applicant has on private property with a tail end on the westerly side that connects to the property line. I'm not sure what to do with that.
It seems there are ways of connecting it with paint or whatever, or
No,
some means,
physically, yeah, the problem is easy, but does that create a public sidewalk or a part of a public sidewalk for a few feet, and then it goes into a private sidewalk that isn't in an easement? And I don't think that we would necessarily look to the applicant to provide a public easement that goes 40 feet off of the pavement for the purposes of making this a public sidewalk that the town now has to maintain.
The alternative is the people are going to walk in the road, I guess.
Well, no, the people are going to walk on this sidewalk no matter what. It's just whether it has an easement underlying it and the town responsible to plow it. I mean, they're not going to stop people. Lynn, do you have a comment?
I'm just looking at the map here, and the sidewalk on the opposite side of the street stops partway down their property. And heading further down Continental Boulevard, there's no sidewalk on either side of the street.
That is correct.
Certainly,
At
when
this
you go
time.
out towards the mall, there's no sidewalk on either side. I thought I remember from sort of looking out there and just doing the windshield survey that the other side had sidewalk till about 20 or 25 Continental Boulevard. But if you're looking at it and there's a break in it, it could well be.
Yeah, I don't see any sidewalk further down on either side. Now, there may be now, this is Google, so
Hadn't been any sidewalks built out there in a while.
I can't imagine they've built any sidewalks, but
No.
this is the Bellwether property. And the sidewalk stops in front of their building at the entrance to their southerly parking lot.
And I would imagine that the engineer for this project didn't necessarily go out and survey the other side, but they've shown it on their existing conditions drawing all the way across the way on the other side.
Well,
That's
that existing
probably-
conditions doesn't go all the way to the end of the parking lot. And so if it goes to the end of the parking lot, then it goes past their space.
I'm just thinking if we continue to waive sidewalks on this street, we're never gonna get sidewalks there.
Just as a matter of interest, when the building at the end of, on the big curve, and I'm trying to think what the building was called, and a couple of people lived in that, we tried to get them to put in sidewalks, and we eventually gave up on that one. So we've batted that one before. I'm not saying one way or another, I'm just filling in information. We have batted on trying to get sidewalks all the way down the other side of Continental Boulevard, and
Doesn't mean we should stop trying.
No, it doesn't.
I don't think we should ever stop trying.
Trying to get a chance to take a look here. I'm not sort of checking my text messages.
You got it up, I've got it here.
The site plan, Lynn, shows concrete sidewalk existing.
There is a concrete sidewalk
It
there,
is
and
there.
it goes
On the opposite side.
up to the building which has got all those funny aerials in its car park, and that's the entrance to that building is where it stops.
Right.
It doesn't go round the corner where their parking lot is.
Right.
That's where it stops on the other side of the road
So it is.
at that building. I think they call it 501 or something.
It is missing in front of the Amcor rigid plastic, so if that's what that building is, what Google says it is. And then it picks up again in the next site and goes a bit longer.
I just see people walking and running on that street.
They do. They do.
Any other comments or questions by members of the board? I'm personally in favor of the waiver because of the existence of what is likely a usable bit of walkway already in front of the building. I don't dislike the suggestion that Nelson made with respect to can you carry that out to the end of the property to the west. I think to the east, you've already got a walkway that connects it to the other Tech NH building, and then there's a walkway in front of it that leads across the front of their site. I think that when we get out here and we start dealing with sidewalks on this side versus sidewalks on that side, you get to where you're almost suggesting people are supposed to cross the road to get to the other sidewalk, and
God forbid.
you know that's probably a worse suggestion than
Yes.
doing some of these other things. So that's my 2 cents. But
On the basis of your 2 cents, Mr. Chairman, I make a motion that we grant a waiver to make it not necessary for him to put the sidewalk in on the basis that where it is, here it is somewhere. I keep forgetting that. On the basis that strict conformity would propose an unnecessary hardship, and the waiver will not be contrary to the spirit and intent of the regulations.
is there a second for Alistair's motion? Paul seconds. Do you want to take account of Nelson's suggestion that the sidewalk continue for the last few feet?
I would think that would be
To
a
the
great
west.
improvement, Mr. Chairman, to my motion.
Is that is consistent with your second, Paul?
Yes.
Towards the west? Any
South.
further discussion?
So the motion, so I understand it now, includes that
Little
piece.
bit of extra.
Yeah.
Waive the sidewalk requirement, but require that the applicant go west of his driveway to the property line, that extra 10, 12 feet, whatever that is.
Okay.
That's the motion.
Okay.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
Nay.
Any abstaining? 610 to grant the waiver. Councilor Koenig. Any further discussion about the application in chief? What's the will of the board with respect to conditional final approval?
Mr. Chairman, I make a motion that we grant final conditional approval for this project.
Subject to all the conditions.
Subject to all the conditions in the memo produced by Robert Price.
Is there a second?
Oh, sorry, Kelly did it. Sorry, apologise, Kelly.
Second by Lynn Christensen. I think the one thing that I forgot to mention earlier that I wanted to mention before we vote, you mentioned the Conservation Commission just had the fertilizer requirement. They also had a suggestion about using the Green Snow Pro salt application, and I think as a board, I just wanted to pause for a second and make sure we recognize where this site is and decide whether this is a zero salt use site
Oh, absolutely.
or a Snow Pro site.
Mr. Chairman, bearing in mind where it is, I think we ought to go for zero salt.
This is in the aquifer.
It's in the aquifer and it's too close to the
The wellhead,
It's an
is
adequate
it in the
brook.
wellhead protection as well? Well, then I would agree with that.
sand only, no salt.
Okay, so let's table the main motion on final approval and deal with what the board would like to deal with the salt recommendation, because our normal conditions of approval would be to meet all the Conservation Commission's recommendations, and in this case, we want to bolster the recommendation a little bit.
Well, in that
Will
case,
someone make a
Mr.
motion
Chairman,
to that
I make a
effect?
motion that we override the Conservation Commission's suggestions and add a requirement there be zero salt used on this site.
Sand only, no salt. Second for that? Second by Lynn. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
Did we do a public hearing?
Any abstaining?
Public
Yeah, we did.
hearing. Do you want to?
Yeah, we did that.
Yes, we did
did
that.
that.
Yeah, we did. Yeah.
Nobody wanted to say anything, but we did one.
Just-
Okay,
just
so
didn't
with
recall,
that,
sorry.
the condition of approval requires no salt use, and there's already a motion and second on the table, on the floor, for granting final approval subject to all the conditions, including the one we just modified. Any other discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstaining? 700 for final approval.
Thank you guys, really appreciate it.
Thank you for that. With that,
It's nice to see the extra development.
back to the agenda. Okay, now we are, because of the reordered agenda, going to deal with item 3 on the agenda, Brett W. Vaughn as the applicant and Brett W. Vaughn Revocable Trust as the owner. Continued review for consideration of final approval of a 13-lot residential subdivision. The parcel is located at 123 Wilson Hill Road in the R1 Residential District. Tax map 4A, lot 23. This item is continued from the July 18th, August 15th, September 5th, January 2nd, all the July 18th, August 15th, September 5th, 2017, and January 2nd, 2018 planning board meetings. Robert, is there anything that we need to know before we hear from the applicant?
Yeah, just give me a quick second to organize that. Okay. All right, so late this afternoon, CLD did submit their review comments for this project, and you should have a copy in front of you. I did have a chance to go over it with Deputy Director Tuamala at the end of the day today. She stayed late to make sure I had her comments on it. She felt that the vast majority of these comments from CLD could be addressed in the background as after a conditional approval, as standard engineering comments would be handled. There are 4 items that she flagged in that review that I just want to make the board aware of at this time. On page 9, item K of the review.
Page 9 of the CLD memo.
Yes. There's a comment there that from CLD that reads, the applicant has added an access drive for the stormwater management area at stations 7+70, noting that this was at the request of the Deputy DPW Director, and states that the location and design of the proposed access points were reviewed with the DPW Director. We note that the narrow path with a steep slope with portions exceeding 18% is proposed for the access drive at Station 13+50, which could present issues with washout and seasonable inaccessibility due to snow, mud, or ice. The applicant should review this proposed access with town DPW personnel to determine if they have the equipment to safely access this detention basin or otherwise propose another basin location and or means of maintenance. Relocating the pond further away from the adjacent wetland is also likely to minimize adverse effects of the 15-inch pipe potential point source discharge currently directed at the downstream wetland. We continue to suggest that access be provided to the bottom of all treatment and management areas that will become the town's responsibility to maintain. Don's comment on this one is that it is a maintenance concern. They do not have the equipment to go down into that area right now. It is too steep. But she is willing to have the applicant revise that somehow to create some sort of a less steep access point so they can actually get down there. But the way it's designed now, they have no ability to really get down there to maintain that pond.
Before you go on, could you
Yep.
identify on the map where that is?
Yeah, I'd rather have Chad identify that.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. For the record, my name is Chad Brandon. I'm a civil engineer with Fieldstone Land Consultants. Just to clarify, the area that is being referenced in that particular comment, there's actually two locations. The first part of that comment has to do with the access into Detention Basin 1, which is this location here. When we had met prior with DPW, they had asked us to provide an access onto the berm of that particular basin. The berm location is between the forebay and the detention basin, so we had addressed their comments at that time. It sounds like after further review, they're asking us to, to modify that access again. We don't have any issues with that. We actually think there's a pretty good alternative as far as maybe coming in this location and then traversing the slopes down to the bottom of the basin there. So that's the first part. We don't have any issues working with them. It sounds like in their further review of the design that they've, just asked us to re-evaluate that particular scenario. The second one is really the first time there's been any comments relative to Detention Basin 2 and the access that we're proposing, which is along the common line between lots 10 and 11. The design has been this way for many months now, but again, I think as we're getting closer to the final review, if you will, of this project, they're looking at some of these details a little bit closer, and they expressed some concern relative to the slope of this access through this section here. We certainly think if we met with DPW again, that there are a number of alternatives as far as how we could potentially get down to that basin. We could certainly come in this direction and parallel the contours a little bit more, which would allow us to lessen the slope of that access. Ultimately, getting to the bottom of that basin as they desire. So those are additional comments that have come up in the latest review. We felt that we did address DPW's initial comments with our prior revision, but we're happy to work with them on resolving those items.
Thank you for that. Okay, Robert, what's the second item that Don pointed out?
Sure. The next comment is on page 10. It is item L. The current comment there is the applicant has revised the drainage design to utilize head walls instead of catch basins and reconfigured other catch basins as well. We note that although this approach solves the great capacity concern, but the benefit of deep sump catch basins collection of sediment is lost, which could result in increased swale maintenance for the town. Don caught that and wrote down that is a concern for them, the additional maintenance, the fact that they lost the collection of sediment there, and just wanted to make sure that the applicant was aware of that as well, to resolve again after the fact is fine.
So, Chad, does that just simply require that the catch basins are run a little deeper to have sediment control, or what's the?
Sure. Do you mind if I discuss this at the plan again? Might be a little easier. So we touched on this at the January 2nd meeting. We kind of walked through a number of the concerns at that time, which were really, the remaining items at that time were drainage and erosion based. and a lot of it had to do with the open drainage swale on the uphill side of the road through this section. We had initially had catch basins proposed in the swale, and those catch basins were interconnected. And one of the comments that CLD had was they felt that the flow that we had going to the catch basins exceeded the regulations in town. The regulations actually are written to address catch basins that are installed in a roadway application that would have standard grates on them. The catch basins in the swales have a type C concrete grate, which is basically an opening which would allow leaves and so on to go into. In order to address that concern, we thought the best avenue might be to install culverts. Obviously, there's been some discussion relative to that, and we may have to, through that comment and Ms. Twamala's concerns, meet with DPW again and just see if there's a balance between culverts or if they want us to put the catch basins back. If we put the catch basins back, we would simply just have to add an additional one to reduce the flow if the flow is in fact a concern. So it's not a big deal. We think, a meeting with DPW, just kind of ironing out what their preference is. Obviously, this is a public road, so we do want to make sure that, the design meets their desires.
Okay, thank you for the response. Robert, what else we got?
Next one is on page 11. It is item T. Subdivision or site review regulations 4.16.1.2.a and 4.16.2.3.a. The distance between street CB1 and CB3 is 345 feet, and the distance between 3 and 5 is 387 feet. This exceeds the 300-foot maximum distance between catch basins. Although the grate capacity is met in these locations, the calculations do not account for the spread of stormwater at the catch basin. Due to the horizontal curvature of the road and the steep slope of the proposed road, the applicant should provide the spread calculations. Also, the applicant should revise the drainage design to meet the 300-foot maximum requirement between catch basins. So, all hinging on the fact that they're more than 300 feet apart. And Don just wanted me to express to the board and the applicant that DPW is not willing to accept a waiver on that requirement. So they would be asking the applicant to meet the design requirement of 300 feet between catch basins there.
Right, and that's a non-issue. That's just to touch on that. We removed one of the catch basins and changed it to a culvert, and because of that, the spacing between the catch basins is now greater than 400 feet. So in the interest of addressing a prior concern, we've raised one. So by adding a catch basin along that run, we can mitigate that, and that's not an issue.
So you have no problem complying by adding the extra catch basin?
That's correct.
Okay, great. Robert, what's number 4?
And the last one, kind of, I think, hinging on where Chad was talking earlier, page 13, item E. Comment from CLD here says, due to the proximity of the existing wetland to the proposed 18% access path and the detention pond DB2, the applicant should consider additional temporary and permanent erosion control measures. Don's response to that was to ask Chad why that's even part of the design. They don't need it, want it, and don't mind if it actually went away.
Right.
So give us the lay of the land here, what we're talking about.
Sure. So this is detention basin 2 down here. This latest round of comments, obviously, we've noticed that DPW really doesn't care for this, the access to it. So we're going to work with them on, maybe some alternative to that. One of the things that's mentioned, and actually in the staff memo or memorandum, under the recommended conditions of approval, there's one comment relative to this, and that was really one of the few comments that we wanted to address before the board this evening, because we do want to have the ability to review this with DPW and make the necessary modifications. There is a portion of the road that does drain in this direction. There's a high spot in the road at about station 1425, which is right about here. And so this portion of the road ultimately drains to the east and makes its way, down this topography here, ultimately ending out in this basin. The treatment for the road runoff does get accomplished through treatment swales that are adjacent to the roadway. So this basin is really there just to help mitigate the rate of runoff from the site. There are options and different design best management practices that we may be able to contemplate in this location after receiving this latest feedback from DPW. So this may change, the access may change some, but this will be required at some capacity somewhere in this general location. So we would just like to have the flexibility to work with DPW on, the final design of that. To us, it's not a big deal. There is flexibility. The reason why we located the basin down here, there's a level area down at this location. There's actually kind of a natural berm down here that we're utilizing. And we are proposing adequate erosion control in this area. But I think it just needs to be, labeled a little bit better so that, the call-outs are a little more noticeable on the plan. So again, we don't have an issue with this concern. We think it's certainly an item we could work with DPW on.
So let me make sure I understand it. So CLD Fuss and O'Neill is saying that there should be some additional erosion control. Where's your arrow? Southeast of the detention pond, and what DPW is saying is we don't really care if there's a detention pond at all.
DPW wants to know whether we really need this.
Okay.
And the answer is ultimately yes. We will need this at some capacity. And I guess just to speak openly about some of the options, if they have a real concern about, this access, there's obviously ways that we could address slope by revising the alignment of that access road. But we could also consider moving this basin, maybe up in this area here, which would address, access if we came down this property line. And so there's a lot of flexibility in where we could locate that basin. And so I think it's important, given the latest, review, that we're able to have that open dialogue with DPW. In the end, we have to meet the town standards, no increase in the rate, of runoff from the site. And this project does require an alteration of terrain permit as well. So it's important that we iron out these, final details with DPW so that we can ultimately complete that permit with the state. I don't know if that helps or if I'm raising, more concerns.
Well, it helps me. I mean, I'll let everybody else speak to their own questions and concerns if they have any.
What's the outfall from that basin? Or is there one?
Yeah, there is an outfall. There is an outlet structure located on basically the south side of the basin, and then it outfalls to a head wall and into a riprap, like an energy dissipating apron. So that would help the storm water change to sheet flow and reduce the energy.
And then it goes across the adjacent properties, right, to the south?
It ultimately discharges into this wetland here, and this wetland continues along.
Oh, that's an existing wetland?
Yeah, that's correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
Most of it's going to recharge the water system
for the wells?
For anybody that's doing wells.
Yeah. Okay.
Other comments or questions? Okay. So that covers the CLD memo. And Robert, so just so that we all have an understanding of it, Dawn's sense of things is that anything else left in the CLD Fuss and O'Neill memo is something she has a comfort level with as a condition of approval to resolve as a matter of engineering detail.
Yeah, and as usual, we do have a proposed condition, number 5, that applicant shall address any outstanding comments from the town's review consultant, CLD, so that she's comfortable with using that condition to take care of everything that's left.
Okay. So should we add to that condition that they satisfy the forthcoming comments or the existing comments from CLD to say, and the comments from DPW? Would that make any difference?
I don't know that would make a difference because it's still, I mean, you certainly can if you want to. Dawn's got her own comments separate in here anyway. And again, she's going to be working alongside them to make sure that she's happy with CLD, especially alongside with the drainage stuff.
Oh, I have no doubt that she'll put in the work. I just want to make sure that we're giving her the authority to enforce it and do it.
If that would make the board more comfortable, then certainly. Yeah.
I have confidence in Dawn's work, so I would do it. I would propose that we do it. Other comments or questions with respect to the engineering work? Robert?
No, moving on. So if anybody's engineering, I'll let you.
Okay. I'm done with engineering.
Okay.
Did you have more that you wanted to?
Just really quick, Dawn also had mentioned, I think she might have picked up an old comment somewhere, that previously the plans for quite some time have shown to the eastern side, the part that wraps around was previously listed in a conservation easement. These plans do show that it's a no-build restriction, and Dawn and I had that specific conversation that she'd rather see it as a no-build restriction than a conservation easement. So that that addresses that concern completely. So just to kind of wrap things up overall, as we touched upon, she's comfortable at this point that the board could move, if they'd so choose, to go for conditional approval. And the only other items that the board has left now is there's a couple of outstanding waivers that still need action.
Okay. Thank you for that detailed introduction. It's probably the longest introduction that we've had because of the details with the engineering. And with that, I know you've already introduced yourself once,
Sure.
but give me a presentation of what we've accomplished since the last time we were together and where you think we stand with the application.
Sure. Well, we covered a good amount of the detail that has been covered since our last meeting. We were before you last on January 2nd. At that time, we were actively addressing CLD's review, DPW's review at that time, and again, their reviews really focused on some drainage and erosion control concerns as it related to the open drainage swales along the proposed roadway. We made a formal submission on January 17th that consisted of revised plans. We also submitted a response letter addressing all of CLD's comments at that time. Unfortunately, because of the backlog, I think that CLD had, we were unable to get a review from them until about 4:30 this afternoon. But we did have an opportunity to go through it. There are a number of cleanup item comments, but I think Dawn really pulled out probably the 4 larger comments that are in their letter. We don't have any objection, as I previously presented, to addressing those and working with DPW and staff and CLD, I guess, on those remaining items. I think those, at the last meeting, DPW actually wrote a memo and it was presented to us at the meeting that basically said they were not comfortable with the board granting the remaining 2 waivers pertaining to the roadway slope until we adequately addressed some of CLD and their concerns. I think what's important about where we're at this evening is I saw in the staff memo and in working through some of those responses from Ms. Twomala from DPW that they are in fact now supporting those remaining waiver requests. So we're hoping that the board will entertain acting on those this evening. We did review them in some detail at the January 2nd meeting, but we'd be happy to go through those again if you'd like, Mr. Chairman. And then ultimately this evening we're hoping the board would consider action in regards to a conditional approval for the project. We do not have any objections to the recommended conditions of approval that are outlined in staff's comments, with the exception of the one item related to the drainage. We just want to have that flexibility to meet with DPW and make some modifications. We don't want there to be a specific condition that doesn't allow us that flexibility.
I know that we did talk about the waivers in some detail, but please just give us another introduction to them so that we can take them up fresh without confusing them with anything else that we might have thought about since January.
Sure. The remaining items that we're requesting waivers on pertain to section 4.12B in the road and utility standards, which states that street grades shall not exceed 6% over a distance of 800 feet or 8% over a distance of 600 feet. This section does also state that variations from these grades may be permitted by the board where advisable based on topographic conditions and the feasibility of the development of the parcel in question. As the board may recall, we have been working on the development of this property since April of 2015, when we were first before you. And in fact, we were before you back in May of 2015. We spent the better part of the last 2 years working on a layout and a design that really works for the development and also the abutting properties. I'm sure everybody remembers the amount of abutters that we had here back then with concerns relative to impacts to their land and potential water supply. And so the board really asked us to take a step back and come up with a plan that maybe was more sensitive to their concerns and worked for everybody. And that's part of the reason why we adjusted the alignment of the roadway. We requested the road length waiver, which the board granted at the January 2nd meeting. What that allowed us to do is rework the geometry of the layout for the subdivision and pull the road and, a lot of the proposed house sites away from the surrounding areas and provide additional buffering to the abutting properties. In order for us to do that and to minimize the land alteration and overall excavation for this project, we have been seeking a waiver on the roadway grade for this project. We did discuss this way back in May of 2015, and at that time, the board, you guys did share with us that if we were able to get the support of the fire department and DPW, that's certainly something that you have considered in the past. So we're before you this evening with a plan that we have reviewed with DPW, we've reviewed with the fire department. We think it's a good plan. It's a plan that takes everybody's interest into concern. It minimizes the land alteration required for the development, minimizes the cuts and fills for the property, and in our opinion provides a nice quality subdivision for Mr. Vaughn. So with that, the waiver request does outline the requirements. So it states, to accomplish these goals, the design of the roadway consists of an 8% grade that runs for approximately 920 feet. There are vertical curves on each end of this 8% grade, which make the total length of the roadway over 6%, 1,125 linear feet. This exceeds the 600 feet outlined in section 4.12B, but the current design does account for the topographic conditions and the feasibility of the development of the subject parcel. And I really touched on, the remainder of what's stated in that paragraph. But I guess to summarize, it's a 63-acre property. We think a 14-lot subdivision is very reasonable, and we really believe we've worked diligently over the last few years trying to put together a plan that fits in well with the neighborhood. So we're requesting that the board consider this particular waiver.
So in the second waiver kind of relates to this because you got a tug of war between the slope and what you end up with by the roadway. So go into the second one as well.
Sure. So the second waiver pertains to section 4.12D, which requires that all approaches to intersections shall have a maximum grade of -2% for at least 50 feet from the intersection, and that the maximum grade on the approach leg shall not exceed 5% for a distance of 200 feet. And basically, because of the topography of the site, it increases so much from Wilson Hill Road. What we're asking for is a reduction on that approach leg, which allows us to start that 8% grade sooner and ultimately reduces the amount of cut that is required through that section. So the two waivers are very similar in nature. We've reviewed these with DPW. We're very close on the approach leg, but because of the geometry of the roadway and the topographic conditions, we felt that it would be beneficial to start that 8% grade slightly sooner, and therefore we do need a waiver from that section. So we're at about 189 feet instead of 200 on that approach leg, and that's what the waiver request is for.
Okay, so you have the appropriate amount of -2% grade. and this deals with the next 200 feet. And the requirement is 6% for the next 200 feet, and you've got 6% for 189 feet, and then you start to go at 8%.
That's correct, except for it's 5%.
5%.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. 5%. Understood. Does the board have questions about one or both of the waiver requests? Nelson?
No, I'm all set with that.
Oh, I thought you said, yes, I got a question.
No, I mean, yes, I'm okay. I understand what he's saying, and I see the issue, yeah.
Any other comments or questions from the board? In terms of order of business, does the board wish to open it up for public hearing before we vote on waiver requests?
Yeah,
Okay, let's
we
do
should,
that.
Mr. Chairman.
Are there abutters or interested citizens who wish to weigh in on this proposal before the board considers action on either the waivers or the application in general? I see none, but we do have a communication in writing that the board's received by email from Michael Redding. And Robert, do you have it handy?
I do, Mr. Chair.
You want to read it briefly into the record?
Sure. It says, hi, Tim. I had an unanticipated event come up at work that will keep me from attending the February 6th Planning Board meeting. I wanted to send along my comments regarding the Vaughan subdivision application. As I mentioned in my January email in my discussion with a couple of abutters, we were not we were not clear as to why the board did not view the opinion of the Emery and Garrett report as substantial and requiring action by the applicant. The board has traditionally relied upon its professional experts to guide them in determining what additional studies and efforts should be performed by the applicant before final approval. It was evident in the last meeting that the board valued Dawn Tuamala's professional opinion and chose to delay approval until her concerns were resolved. In my email correspondence with Dawn, she indicated that she was unable to render an opinion of the Emery and Garrett report or that of the potential impact on abutter wells. She indicated that the professional geologist who prepared the report would be the best professional to advise the board. As I have testified before, I feel the recommendations in the Emery and Garrett report are reasonable and should be addressed by the applicant prior to final approval. Sincerely, Michael Redding, 105 Wilson Hill Road.
Thank you, Robert. Are there any other written comments that have been received other than that one? Okay. Again, anybody else in the room? So, Chief? Captain, I'm sorry. You got to get to a microphone, though.
I just wanted to discuss the current situation with the cisterns between the town and the developer, John Manueli, Fire Marshal. At this point, we've done some research on the cisterns as far as cost benefit, and we are still working with Mr. Vaughn to come up with a cost benefit that works for the town. At this point, Chief Currier is of the opinion that the best benefit would be to form a homeowners association of the 14 lots to assume the cost of the cistern rather than have it gifted to the town. There is a precedent for this. Actually, Colorado does this quite frequently. In this way, the cost of repair, maintenance, and ultimate replacement would be borne by the homeowners who would get the benefit of the fire protection water. We are still working with Mr. Vaughn. I am sure we're going to come up with something that will work for both us and the town. But at this point, that is the proposal.
So in that proposal, if it ends up being a privately owned structure that's somehow maintained privately with private dollars, does that guarantee that the town have access to it for properties outside of this subdivision?
It would be for the use of fire protection water for any purpose.
Okay. Is there some? No, probably isn't yet. I would like, and I think the planning board would agree, that whatever ultimate solution is worked out, somehow record or codify or guarantee that water is always available.
That would definitely be part of the ultimate agreement with Mr. Vaughn, and I don't see that as being an issue regardless of what direction we go. So.
I didn't think it would be. I just want to make sure that it's in black and white somewhere.
No, it will definitely be written down in that way.
Okay.
So,
and if that's achieved, then you guys are satisfied that we can move ahead with this as a board?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you for your time. Any questions by members of the board?
Could I ask? That sounds like a change of heart. Didn't I understand last time you were saying that?
I think you just turned your microphone off by accident when you were...
On and off. It sounds like a change of heart. I thought last time you were saying you wanted the town to
No, that was
take
a
it so that it
proposal
could
by
be.
Mr. Vaughn, and that was something we were looking at. What's happened, Mr. Koenig, is we're looking at the cost to the town itself. We have the information provided by Mr. Vaughn regarding the cost of a cistern. It basically comes out to $100,000 for the cistern, and then the cistern has a lifespan of approximately 30 years with normal maintenance. The normal maintenance cost is fairly insignificant. It's about $500 per year, painting and stuff like that. It's the replacement cost that's, we can't guarantee in 30 years. I'm pretty sure it's not going to be any less than $100,000, but if you estimate it's going to be $130,000, if you divide that over the 14 lots over the years, it comes to approximately $300 per year for a homeowner, for the association to bank that to replace it when it was necessary, as opposed to the town having to pay $130,000 in 30 years to replace it. We're still, working with Mr. Vaughn to see if there's a different alternative that will work for the town and for him. But at this point, we're still in negotiations with that.
I guess I thought I heard concern that if it was privately maintained, it might not be maintained.
And anything like that will have to be written down as part of the agreement. Make sure that it's a legal document that agrees to that. We would have to do inspections and that type of thing to make sure that it's actually being maintained. And again, I'm basically researching this. We have never had a cistern in Merrimack, so I'm trying to find information from other towns and from other things. And like I said, most of the town in this area have numerous cisterns. They have budget items to maintain cisterns, to replace cisterns, whereas Merrimack does not have that. We're looking at another alternative, and like I said, Colorado has the precedent where they have a lot of very large tracts of land with developments that have no water, and they've come up with this homeowners association. If you want to build a house, you can buy into the cistern that it's in that area, and we're trying to look at that model as a possibility.
Okay, thank you.
Before you go, I just want to check with Robert and get a sense of, in the staff's memo with draft conditions of approval, can you point to and then read the condition of approval that would be applicable to receiving the fire department's approval of this?
Yep, so we've got number 11B. It's on page 4 or 5. And the language right now says the applicant shall work with the fire department to determine the appropriate ownership and maintenance responsibility for the proposed cistern and provide written verification of any agreement and or copies of any agreement to the community development department for the project file.
Okay. I like the condition, and I want to add one sentence to it, and that is, to the extent that there's some legal documents involved, that the town's legal counsel reviews them. I assume you wouldn't have any objection to having the
Not at
legal
all.
counsel make sure that the i's
Absolutely
are
not
dotted,
at
t's
all.
are crossed.
I also heard the board talk about having, or John also talk about having it recorded. So I've got such agreement shall be reviewed by the town's legal counsel and recorded at the Hillsborough County Registry of Deeds.
Yeah, I think that makes sense when you got a homeowners association to deal with that. I guess it's for the applicant to answer the question whether the homeowners association would have any other function or role or regulation involved, or whether it will sort of be dormant for 30 years until the cistern breaks and they'd have to figure it all out.
Yeah. My question would be, as this thing gets phased in, it's going to be a number of years before these are all sold, and you'll have different ownerships. The first person who buys in there, how do they, they're the association at that time, right? It'll be you. Yeah.
The developer is paying for the initial installation of the cistern as part of the project.
Yeah.
So
But-
the ongoing costs would have to be worked out through the association as far as.
And
as
the
far as that.
ownership, the developer would be part of the ownership until such time as he'd sold everything
Correct.
off. He'd be part of the association. I just,
Under those conditions, yes. I see what you're saying.
Yes.
Yeah. As long as everybody understands that.
There is, I've never taken a look at the statutes, if there are any regarding homeowners associations, but with condominiums, there's a very strict sort of construct for how the power is handed off between the developer and the homeowners, and what percentage of them have been sold, and who's responsible, and how they vote, and what they pay, and all of that. I wouldn't be surprised if there was a similar statutory construct for homeowners
And typically, again,
associations.
if the option of gifting it to the town were to be in effect, the way that works is that the gift to the town of the cistern would take effect 1 year after the final property has been sold. So the developer would own it up until 1 year after the last house is sold. So it's kind of along the same idea. Until the last house is occupied and the homeowners association would be formed, it's still the responsibility of the developer at that point.
And so if it were gifted to the town, then how do you deal with the notion of who replaces it in 30 years?
Then the town would have to replace it.
The town would.
And as I said, in many other towns, Laconia, Goffstown, I've talked to various fire departments in the state. They have multiple cisterns, and because of that, the town's budget has a mechanism to replace them as needed. In some towns, they're replacing 1 or 2 cisterns every couple of years, because as they come up to their 30-year lifespan and they find leaks and stuff, that's what's happening. We currently don't have that as part of the town budget.
You may know, or Robert may know, or maybe Councilor Koenig may know, a gift to the town of the cistern would probably require the approval of the town council to accept it.
That would be correct.
And so the town council, which has control of the budget, can make whatever decisions it chooses to about whether it wants to be on a 30-year ownership plan, or whether it wants to say, applicant, keep it, you deal with it.
That would be correct.
And the planning board doesn't have to be involved in that decision.
That is correct.
Even better. Thank you for that testimony. There's no other questions for folks. No other questions? Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Okay. So with that, we'll close the public hearing and welcome the applicant back up here. Nelson, yes.
Before we do that, I wanted to go back to Michael Redding's letter, because I don't think Michael Redding was talking about the cistern issue.
No, I don't think he was.
I think he was talking about the well issue.
Yes, he is.
Yes.
And are we settled on what we're going to do about that? Are we, has the applicant agreed to that, or is that part of this?
If I could, I would like to respond to that particular comment. I mean,
Yeah.
there's certainly a ton to be said, and I've done a lot of research. Brett Vaughn, applicant, 123 Wilson Hill Road. There's a few views on this. So he's talking about the paper by Emery and Garrett and what it says and what it recommends. And my first comment about Emery and Garrett, I've read it many times, is that, as you recall, this board didn't ask, and I didn't pay for, Emmett and Garrett to make suggestions on studies. They were requested to review what the first engineer said as to the accuracy. That's just kind of technical, but that's what we asked. He even said it. And if you read the details in there, and I have questions with some of the calculations they use and everything else, but if you really look at it, you've got one engineering rebuting another. But for the two questions that were asked, is there enough water up there on that hill, and will it affect another well? These questions are answered that there's 10 times enough water up on that hill. No reason to believe it isn't. It's just like the rest of the state, and that it's very, very unlikely that that we would affect the well or anybody else's wells. And I want to get to the point of if this is really for you guys to be concerned about in the first place. I don't want some information on that, but
I don't want to interrupt your presentation, and I welcome it. I just want to make sure I'm clear as to when you talk about the results of the engineering being, right. Are you talking about Emery and Garrett or the previous engineer before that?
So the it's backing up again. So when we came in here and talked about this, and some abutters gave testimony that they're concerned about their water, and that bottom line is that if someone builds another house on another adjacent property, it could affect their wells, because some of them aren't very good. It's a whole other subject as to what they could do or should do to maybe make their water better because their existing condition. But this board suggested, and actually Michael Redding suggested to me directly and gave me the name of the first engineer.
Do you happen to have that, Chad, who the first engineer was?
I forget who the first engineer was now. Hydrosource.
Hydrosource, okay.
So, and his comment to me was that we just need a desktop study so that we can move past this. So we paid for a desktop study, and the engineer came in and well, actually didn't come in. We presented it and came back again. And everybody here said, this is confusing. I don't know what it says. Bring the engineer in. So we went to another meeting and brought the engineer in, and he answered the questions in his testimony saying that there's water and whatever. And then, I don't know who recommended, but this board suggested, well, let's have our engineering firm review the other. And that's where I was getting to on that
Okay.
subject. So, it seems clear to me, yes, at the end of that report, they say there's things we can do. We can do a study, and if you really read the fine print on that, it says that we can't really be 100% sure, but we sure make your decision easier. So hire us. I just think it's an incredible conflict of interest for them to go to that instead of just answering the question that they were asked for, and I can see why they would. But so you know, that's what I have to say about. And there's a lot of other stuff in the report if we want to get into detail about the testimony and what part of the testimony they use and how they consider some testimony science and whatever. But that's pretty much my comment on that. But so I've done, just kind of while we're on it, hopefully this is short, but there's been a lot of conversation. I've had a lot of conversation with the state and with professionals to the whole question if it's really your responsibility at all as a board. Now, I know that your responsibility is the welfare and concern for the public and how the zoning is applied and all of that. And I think you guys have done a great job, because you've probably the biggest thing is the suggestion to talk with the abutters about what we could do to make the situation better. Not saying that I don't have the right to do it one way or another, but we talked about it. And at great expense, engineering, time, meetings, and also change of plans, design plans. But probably the biggest one that I also agreed to is that I agreed not to do any blasting. And that first cut on the driveway is a monster. And the road company I'm working with right now is keeps saying, what are you doing this for? You're adding maybe $100,000 to the cost of the road. I'm saying, well, it's an agreement I made with Butters. I sat down and said, how can we make this better and get it off the table? That's one of the agreements I made. Having said all that, talking to Department of Environmental Services, and I think I'd mentioned it to the board before that I'd had some conversation, I'm not going to say specific because their testimony at this point doesn't make much difference, but there's some clear statements on documents from the state. One of them, quote, says, the state is the entity that can regulate or restrict groundwater use. So the state's saying that that's their job. There's another quote on one of the documents that says, landowners' development of a groundwater withdrawal or of any amount, let's see, no, excuse me, I'm not reading that right. The quote says, landowners developing a groundwater withdrawal of any amount have the right to reasonable use of the water under common law. So it's saying that's common law that says reasonable use. So I want to kind of jump to what I think we're talking about reasonable use. This town has zoning ordinance that says that this is a residential area. And it also is quite restrictive, as we all know. It's 2.3 acres per lot. We've reduced the amount of lots that we were originally proposing to a density that would be closer to a lot in every 5 acres. So it's an incredibly reasonable use. We've changed the design to move homes to the other side of the road and push the road away. We've added a barrier, and we've agreed not to blast, amongst other things. So there's also a comment in there. It says reasonable use is the criteria, regardless of which use was established first. If you think about it, right? So it's like, just because someone dug a well first doesn't mean I don't have a right to dig here if he's having a problem, and he's got a right to dig another well himself. The other thing I'd like to point out, just reasonable thing, as far as reasonable use, and when I was talking to the state about it, they said, well, what are you doing up there? I said, well, it's residential. The state does require some pretty extensive tests if you're doing a golf course or you're doing industrial or you're trying to do something that's up and above, but clearly states to me that this is a reasonable use you're asking for, and also brought up to my attention that are you on septic or sewer? I said, I'm on septic. And he says, well, then really there's no recharge issue at all. There's virtually no recharge. Whatever you take out, you're putting back in the ground. And as I was kind of kiddingly said over there before, it seems like all the stormwater is draining in awful close to the draining down into there too. But so I would ask the board to consider that maybe you've done your job by bringing up the point and letting us talk about it. But I think that to ask me to do a study that Emmett and Garrett has recommended, it's my opinion, that you would be holding me to a higher standard. That you would be holding me to a higher standard, as in all of those homes that are close to each other. I mean, we did the measurement before when the one abutter was talking about, hey, you're too close to my house, and I put the tape up there, and I said, the closest well to his house that potentially might be developed, you take that same distance and put it across the homes that are there, and there's 5 wells that are all close to each other. And I know that one of the abutters that gave testimony here that said, I run out of water, it's a terrible situation. He's also informed me, and he's got it on a document for his disclosure document for a house that he's just sold, that he fracked it, he fracked his well, and he added a new pump. And guess what? He's got no problems anymore. But the testimony sounded awful dramatic. So, given all these criteria, I kind of think that maybe we could say, hey, we've done the job. And the fact is, I can't afford a $200,000 or whatever it is study that isn't going to be conclusive, and would be, I just thinking that's been stated, it would be holding me to a higher standard. Now, one last thing I'd like you to consider is, if you did that, if you said you got to do this, what's the difference with the very next, with any subdivision or well, it's never been done before, so it seems arbitrary if you would choose to do that. And if you said, hey, you've got to do that, does that mean that anybody that ever digs another well has to do a test to see? So anyway, that's about all I got without other specific things from an abutter to address on that.
Before you change the subject or leave where you're at, I think you also brought us Skilling, the
Yes.
drilling company, came and testified, and I want to make sure you get a chance to talk about what they told us.
Well, I don't have any, I know that I've had conversations with Skillings and other drillers since, because, it's obviously a big deal. So I don't remember specifically, except that his comments to me were, I don't remember any of the specific testimony, to be honest with you, except that his opinion was, you can never tell. You can dig a well there and get nothing, and dig a well there and get a ton. Speaking of that, since we started this discussion, there's been 4 new wells dug, or drilled. 4 new wells dug that are all abutters. Across the street, both of those are closer than the new proposed one. One up at the corner over. I'll just show you. Yeah, so I don't know. Can you see this, or should I go back to the other?
Start there, and then we'll sort of
All right,
see if I can
so,
follow you. And maybe we'll
the site's right up in here. And there was a well dug there since our discussion. There was 2 dug right here, which are very close to the woods, which is 119, which is the guy that has the deepest well and has tried to actually get water and having trouble. And then there was one that was dug down below, but it's still an abutting lot. So I asked him, this fellow said he's got 8 gallons a minute, and these two are both 20 gallons a minute.
Yeah. The
And-
ones across the
and-
road I always understood to be kind of in a different geology.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then I'm up the hill and I got 5. But I don't, the engineers wouldn't say that that's a different geology. As a matter of fact, if you want to look at elevation, the distance between elevation-wise is almost flat compared to where those 2 new wells were dug. You go down the road, and then they're up on the hill, they're up on another ridge. So, but my point being to assume that there's no water there is it's just not proving to be the case. And I think I guess what I'm trying to say is on 2 fronts. I think this board has the opportunity to say, we've done our best, but it's not really our responsibility to prove testing because of what I believe common law says is that even if a well is there, just because someone dug their well first doesn't mean it's their water. It doesn't. I mean, that's pretty clear in the common law, and so I should have the ability to dig mine, and I've jumped through hoops at much cost to make it at my own cost, to make it as good as it possibly could under, reasonably for those people. So if the question is just from the board, do we require testing of some sort, then I would ask this board to say that is not a requirement, and it's not even the responsibility of the board to require it. I also remember a comment, now that we're bringing up all these past ones, that at one point, I think someone on the board, maybe it was you, Mr. Best, that said, well, gee whiz, if they had, I don't know if you said gee whiz, but he said, if, so.
I might have.
So, he might have, yeah. So he says like, well, so geez, what happens, this is first discussions, what happens if someone says, hey, I got no water now? This board granted that it's their responsibility. What I would say that this doctrine and that the responsibility is not on you, and that there is no recourse there because it's not your responsibility. It's a zone for residential. That's what I'm talking about doing. And the only discussions that I've had that I know for sure that probably weren't discussed in this room with Skillings is that he agrees with other well diggers and the first engineer that the concept of trying to give any real enlightened information from a test is not right. The first engineer said, I'll be happy to take your money, but you're not going to learn anything from it. And so does Skillings. He says, you're not going to learn anything from it. That's just not the way the science works, and that's why it's a common law situation like this, that you have the right to your own.
Yeah. Thank you for elaborating on all that and providing the information. Does any member of the boards have additional questions? Dan?
So you've been doing this project for about, what, year and a half now?
Oh, no.
Well, working on it for
Nearly
a
3.
lot longer than that. It
So-
started with we kind of stalled with the water talk.
Just real quick, so ever since this project's been working, in your opinion, in professional opinion, do you think there's enough water, yes or no?
I do, yes, without a doubt. To be honest with you, when the guy dug the one across the street, I thought we were going to go deep.
Hold your microphone up or
So-
switch to that one or something. You're not getting picked up.
All right, so when the abutter across the street dug that well, and I own the property next to it, the driller was saying, well, we don't know how deep we're going, but I'll give you a bargain after we go so deep on these, so pay me up front a little extra on these two. And I'm like, man, I'm going to have to go deep. And they went 225 feet and stopped with 20 gallons. So yeah, I mean, I listen to it all and say, hey, I don't know, but as far as if you really look at the wells that are producing, as we talked about before, they all meet what Department of Environmental Services recommends for a minimum required well. When you measure in the depth, how deep the well, the column, and how much they're getting. When you really look at except for some of maybe the emotional testimony, or maybe people really just don't even want a subdivision, but when you really look at the numbers, there are wells that aren't producing that good, but they're 400 feet deep. And everybody says, man, that's terribly deep. Well, it's not that deep in New Hampshire in some spots. So to answer your question, I'm assuming on the proposed subdivision lots that we're going to go deep, because I went deep to get my water. But the fact remains, and as expensive as that sounds, at $8 or $10 a foot, if you go 4 times, you could spend $15,000 on a well. Well, I mean, the town's going to put a current use penalty on those $200,000 a lot. And they're going to have. My point is, there's a lot of other costs involved. It's not just like how hard is it to get the water. That's probably going to be the least of our cost issues.
Okay. So you feel like there is enough? That's
yes.
Okay.
That's it. Okay. Other comments or questions by members of the board? We've done our public hearing already, so is the board prepared to take final action on the?
Mr. Chairman, I think at the last meeting I wasn't very happy with the layout, the new layout, and I understand the whys and wherefores. But when I look at the frontage for Mr. Vaughan's property, which, as we know, is on the opposite side of the road, the whole of that frontage is now a detention basin. Isn't that a conflict of what frontage should be? I mean, if you look at the drawing, it's quite clear. There is the 300 foot or whatever the frontage it had to be, and the whole of that frontage now is a detention basin.
So he's got to have two things. He's got to have frontage and he's got to have a driveway. And there's nothing in our regulations that say that you do both of those things in one spot.
That's not what I meant. But
so his frontage is a basin. That this guarantees that he'll never use it as a driveway, which is exactly what we want.
All right.
That's the one thing I want to make sure.
I raised the issue, Mr. Chairman. It bothered me when I saw it. I don't like the layout, but I understand why he's done what he's doing. That's all.
Okay. Other comments or questions? Nelson?
Yeah, I too don't like the layout for the way you've laid it out. And we've said this before, but again, across the street is one thing. You have an easement through somebody else's property to get to yours. And that kind of a layout, I just plain don't think is right. I don't think it's a correct way to lay out property.
Can we address that, Mr. Chairman?
Sure.
I mean,
If you
the
choose to.
layout of this development has been that way for a long time.
Mm-hmm.
And it's been that way for a long time because this board actually asked us to think outside of the box and come up with something that worked for the abutting properties. And that's what we did.
Yeah.
And this layout meets all of your regulations. So this isn't what I would say was Mr. Vaughan's desired layout in the beginning either. But it was the layout that worked best with the neighborhood. And so that's the reason for the layout. If you recall, this layout isn't similar at all with the layout that we originally proposed. Well, we originally proposed, and if I may, I'm going to just approach the plan again. What we originally proposed was this road coming up this slope much closer to this common boundary line here. We came up through here and then we wrapped around, and we had additional house lots on the east side of the proposed roadway. When the board gave us the task of, hey, try to work with the abutters, because at previous meetings we've had many abutters here. And after we modified this layout, and Mr. Vaughn went around and met with his abutters, all of the abutters in this location here were very happy with the layout that we proposed. Because when the gentleman from Skilling's came here and said it's very unlikely that you're going to have any impacts on a well if you're 300 feet away, I believe was the distance that he threw out there. And then we had Claude Cormier here from HydroSource, who did an analysis of the whole area and did a recharge analysis and said, we're going to have water. It's not going to be desired from the standpoint of, as Mr. Vaughn said, you might have to go deep, but you're going to have water. So we put professionals at the table that said we're going to have water, and we don't believe it's going to have an impact. Well, those statements were in large part due to the modifications in the layout and the separation that this layout allows for. And what I mean by that is because of this, yes, Mr. Vaughn's property is quite unique in the, some of his frontage is here. He also has frontage on South Greater Road. But yes, it is unique. And I understand that under a conventional development, it would not, it would not be supported. This is not conventional. I think this project has gone through a lot of review, and we've incorporated a lot of comments, and that's why, that's why it's this way at this, at this stage. But it's important for the board to understand that although it's maybe not something that you would prefer, the neighborhood preferred it. And I think that that's something that the board, really charged us with, is work with the neighbors. And so I would really appreciate it if the board would consider, that with your determination this evening. Thank you.
Thank you for the explanation. I do recall two neighbors that testified at our last meeting. One of them said, I think, we're fine with the layout, and the other one actually indicated that it was preferred and desired by them to have that layout. And I think that that's important. I think one of the things that I commented on last time, which I think is important and even more important with a change that occurred between last meeting and this meeting. So we talked about the bulk of Mr. Vaughn's lot being subjected to a conservation easement that would be conveyed to the Conservation Commission, and I guess after exploration of that, there isn't an interest by the town to receive that conservation easement, and so instead we'll put a no-build deed restriction on Mr. Vaughn's lot as a way to preserve this and make sure it doesn't get built on. And that's been agreed to by our town engineer and all of that stuff. The way that this lot configuration is, every single one of those homes on Wilson Hill Road are now abutters to that lot. And if someone tried to come before the board or anyone else to break that no-build restriction and say, I want an exception, all of these guys will get noticed for it as abutters. If you didn't have this configuration, you could have some of these abutters who are not abutters of record and wouldn't get notice of it. And I'm not saying anybody's going to come and try and break the no-build, but making all of these people abutters to it is one more layer of protection to make sure someone's watching, because they're all abutters and they're all neighbors now when you create that flag that wraps around the back and goes behind all those homes. So that's my 2 cents on the lot layout. Are there other comments or questions? Dan?
Just quickly, so Conservation Commission says, no phosphate, slow release nitrogen fertilizer to be used. Curious on how that is planning on being enforced with homeowners.
I thought that was typically just a suggestion, but if it's a requirement, I suppose, I don't know, do you have a suggestion? Do you put it in a deed?
So it's accomplished in a couple of ways. So the Conservation Commission doesn't have enforcement authority or the way to compel that. But what happens is they recommend it to us, and then we make it a condition of approval that is enforceable if we choose to do that, which we typically do follow their advice. How do you enforce it? There's a couple of ways that we've attacked in the past, and we can figure out what we think is the best going forward if the board is of a mind to do so. One is putting a note on the plan that gets recorded. So the recorded plan is out there, and all of the people that buy lots in that are going to get notice of certain restrictions. You've also got a homeowners association in this situation. A homeowners association has rules, and this can be a rule. That's a way that you can deal with a situation like this. You can also require it to be a restriction in the deed to say that there are limitations on the use of fertilizer subject that resulted from the subdivision approval that the owner should go take a look at. It doesn't guarantee that somebody's not running to Home Depot and buying whatever the heck they want and putting it on their lawn. But anything that we do with no salt restrictions or fertilizer restrictions end up the same way. The last applicant we heard that made a commitment to do no phosphorus, slow-release nitrogen fertilizer isn't got anybody out there in his yard making sure that he's doing the right thing. You assume that people are going to follow the commitments that they've made, and you do have a department that can follow up on some action if somebody complains and says that they didn't. Sort of the rules of the road. What's that?
We typically would address it on the note to the
plan that would be recorded, and that's what we've agreed to
Yeah.
do.
I think that makes sense. I think since you happen to have a homeowners association, and it's probably a pretty easy thing to deal with there, maybe do it there too. But
Except we haven't got a homeowners association commitment, have we?
No.
well, yes,
That's what I just wanted to.
Okay, that's true. So
The-
if there
the
is a
second-
homeowners
yeah.
association, then do that. Don't create one just for this purpose. But if there happens to be one
Right.
for the cistern,
Which is, it brings me to, so there was John Manueli, made a comment too, and I just wanted to address back to that.
sure.
So, so my feeling on the responsibility of the cistern and all is that, as John says, we can sit, we can talk about it, and we can work out whatever he needs to, because I don't have much of a choice, I don't believe. But I can tell you this, that it was a little bit of a shock to me that I thought we were done until tonight. I didn't realize that the chief even until today, so I was a little taken off by it. And I know John's saying, hey, we'll work through it, it'll be okay. Having said that, I know it's going to be a condition that we work it out to get to get conditional approval. So I'm going to have to do it, and I'm going to have to work with the town. And I didn't really have a lot of time to prepare to think this through, but I think what John's saying is the town doesn't want the responsibility for the cost, whatever it is. And once again, I don't know if it's the board here or not, but it's a condition of getting this approved to do the cistern and to give it to the town, and we all know it's going to be used for whoever needs it. It's a great thing for the town. There's also 13 or 14 lots up there that are going to be paying a heck of a lot of tax money. I don't know if and then you had mentioned the other board, the
Conservation
town
Commission.
council.
Oh, the town council, yes.
So
So-
maybe there's some more talk we can have with, maybe even in front of town council that, hey, could something come from the budget to take care of this, so we weren't put through having the homeowners association just to.
I think
for
it could well be a fruitful discussion. I mean, when you build your road and you build it up to town standards and it's inspected by DPW and then the town accepts it, then the town's going to plow it and replace it and repave it and everything else that it needs forever on after that. So it's not foreign to the town, the idea that they're going to have a cost that comes from a development like this. From my viewpoint, I'm just saying it's not the planning board's decision to decide what the town accepts or not. And I think even Captain Manueli wasn't suggesting that he had a firm position one way or the other, but was more or less saying, we've never done this before. Let's think it through really carefully before we do, because I think that whatever happens with yours, if there's a next time with a subdivision with a cistern, they're going to do whatever, they're going to follow whatever this established way is, either town owned or homeowners association owned, and we'll be consistent as we go forward with that. So I think that they're just being careful with that. I don't know how the cost shakes out sort of town-wide over the course of 30 years in a cistern, and I do think that there's some value. I mean, it's not necessarily used for everyone. It's used for everyone that's within the length of 5 fire truck hoses, 1,300 feet. So,
Well, can't they fill the truck from it? and
Oh,
drive
no,
somewhere?
Mr. Chairman, you're wrong there.
I don't know. I thought
They
that's
do.
what they
Oh,
would
yes.
do. Is they
I
fill
mean-
the truck and drive somewhere else. I know there's not much else out there for anything. And
yeah, there's nothing else out there. There's
There's
you're
nothing
2
else
miles
out there. I
away
mean,
from the next water source. so-
jokingly, 20 years ago when I moved out there and we were talking about, is this road, our driveway okay? And I said, yeah, the driveway's great, but, get the weenies out if you're getting to have a fire, because we don't draw from anything. It was clear that we don't draw from the river, we don't draw from anything. So obviously it's huge, it's great. I think it's wonderful that it's happened. I'm kind of proud that it's part of it. Say, hey, gave the town a cistern. And what John's saying, and just so it's clear, because I think we're in agreement, he's saying we'll talk through all these issues and we'll get there. But then it started talking about, okay, we heard homeowners association and all of that. I'm thinking that maybe John and I, maybe we go to town council and say, hey, this is what's happened. The town's concerned about this. Sounds like really over 30 years, a pretty minimal cost. And if town council says, yeah, that's just like you say, we're maintaining the road, we're maintaining this other,
Yeah.
we would take care of it, then certainly we just deed it over to the town and
That may well
you
be.
don't set up a.
I'm not a member of the town council, so I don't get a vote on that.
So-
I would support, frankly, I think homeowners associations, especially ones without a lot to do, and expecting them to be around and vibrant and have a bank account in 30 years, is a Hail Mary, and I think that the other choice is probably the better plan.
Yeah.
But that's me. I'm not a member of town council, thank God.
All right. So, enough of that.
So, other comments or questions? Okay, what's the will of the board with respect to
Waivers.
final action on the
No,
proposal?
we haven't dealt with the waivers formally, Mr. Chairman.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Not wishing to correct you, of course.
No, thank you. So what's the will of the board with respect to the proposed waiver or waivers? I think they should be dealt with together since the geometry of the road, one turns on the other.
Mr. Chairman, given that the Public Works Director or the Deputy Public Works Director seems to have accepted the circumstances, I would like to make a motion that we grant both the waivers on the basis that specific circumstances relative to the subdivision indicate the waiver will carry out the spirit and intent of the regulations.
Is there a second for Alistair's motion?
Second.
Second by Councillor Koenig. Any further discussion on the waivers? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? One opposed? Any abstaining? 6-1-0 to grant the waivers with Dan opposed. Any further discussion on the application in chief? What's the will of the board?
Mr. Chairman, I make a motion that we give final approval to this proposal, taking into account everything we've heard and all the conditions that are in the memo from Mr. Price dated February the 5th, 2018, with a couple of amendments that have come on during the course of the discussions.
Is there a second for Alistair's motion? Second by Lynn Christensen. Robert, do you have a good capture of whatever we modified for conditions tonight?
Yeah, the first one being with the cistern about the agreement between the fire department and the applicant and recording and reviewing of that document by legal counsel. And the other, revising the comment about CLD review being satisfied also to the satisfaction of DPW, unless you have got some other verbiage you want
Okay.
to replace that
And then we were going to deal with a note on the plan for the use of fertilizer consistent with the Conservation Commission's recommendation.
Was that already on there? Or?
No.
I think we may have a note in the
Yeah.
plan
It
set,
will
but
be.
we'll make sure that it's on the recordable plans, because I
Yes.
think it's probably in like the erosion control notes. It
Okay.
really needs to be on the plans that are recorded as well, so.
Okay. Is there anything else that we discussed tonight? I don't remember any other items. Okay. So there's a motion properly seconded to grant conditional final approval subject to this staff's conditions plus whatever amendments and modifications we made to conditions here tonight. Is there any further discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? 1, 2, 3 opposed. Any abstaining? So that is a vote of 4-3 to grant conditional final approval. So you are approved and you'll get notification from the town as to what all the conditions are that are in the memo. And your long journey come to an end.
No, you're not.
We hope not, Brett. Thank you, though.
Thank you, Brett. Okay, with that, let me find an agenda so I can read the last item into the record and we can get started on it. Item number 5 on our agenda is for Executive Park Drive Realty LLC as the applicant and owner. Review for acceptance and consideration of final approval for a site plan to construct 280 multifamily residential units, clubhouse and other associated site improvements. The parcels located at 4 and 6 Executive Park Drive in the C2 General Commercial and Aquifer Conservation District and 100-year flood hazard area. Tax map 4D, lot 76 and 77. The item is continued from the January 2nd, 2018 Planning Board meeting. Robert, before you give an introduction to that, Zina, I forgot to check with you to make sure you had the people that voted no on the, you got them? Yes. Thank you for that. Okay, Robert, give us an introduction before we hear from the applicant.
Not really much to comment on. The applicant's here tonight to think, present some revisions to the plan set that they've made. I just do want to note that the revisions that you are about to see have not been seen by staff at all. They are in response to comments from CLD and other town departments, and I know they have these plans here, but we have not seen them yet. So,
Okay. Please introduce yourself.
Rob, I recuse myself.
Okay.
Could I clarify that? Did Bob just say the plans we have in front of us are not the plans that are being asked for approval? Is that what I heard?
the applicant for this hearing, they did not submit any plans in time to make it in your packet. So if you've got something in front of you, it's an older set of plans than what they are about to discuss.
Okay, that's what I wanted to be clear on. Thank you.
Please proceed.
Thank you. Attorney Greg Michael on behalf of the applicant. With me at the table is Austin Turner. And we have been working diligently to comply with some of the CLD comments and other concerns associated with the plans. And the changes aren't, they're somewhat significant, but not really that significant. We've got some clarifying memos from DOT regarding traffic, which really isn't plan related. Secondly, we do have revised plans, and a lot of it relates to the parking. I know there were concerns by the board regarding the parking issue, and we believe that we've been able to redesign the site a bit to comply with the regulations.
Okay.
And keep the Mr. Mello, the abutters parking, although that's a non-exclusive easement for parking, keep that completely intact and not have that impacted by our parking requirements, which I think was a concern. I'd also like to point out we did visit with the Conservation Commission. We don't have a particular problem with their comments that they've submitted to you. I'll have Austin Turner comment on the roof drainage from the buildings, which was one of the thoughts. And of course, the request to reduce phosphate levels and salt levels and so forth. We don't have any particular issue with those types of comments. They're not uncommon from the Conservation Commission. So we're basically all set with that. I'd like Austin to kind of take you through the plans, but I want to point out the parking comment because the Concom makes a comment regarding parking. And do we have that plan that shows the supplemental parking?
I'm going to move off to the side so I can see your presentation. So,
essentially, what we're looking at, in accordance with the regulatory scheme that Merrimack has, are 670 required spaces. We're going to be showing 576 to build. If you look at the area to the left of that right in that area there, we've got an additional number of spaces to bring this up to 670. So we can meet the requirements to the letter. However, we don't believe we need that many spaces based upon the nature of the units, what we believe the demographics will be. We've commented upon that in the past. We'd like to reserve that area, keep it open space, but if needed, we have the area to build. Therefore, we would not need a specific waiver from the board, just a consensus that if we need it, we'll build it. Our drainage has been calculated to include that area, to include it. But the Conservation Commission, is one of their specific comments, we didn't ask for it, they put it in. They said if you don't have to build them, we'd like to think that you wouldn't unless they were absolutely needed, and we're certainly prepared to do that. But I want to make it clear that we meet the regulatory scheme if we were to build it all. And, as I said, retain the integrity of the non-exclusive easements for the abutting parcels where the D'Angelo's is in the front, which are part of the easement that Mr. Mello has for his particular property. I know that was a concern of the board. Another matter is the merger. I know this came up in the past. We do intend to merge the parcels. This will be one plan. And this came up at the last meeting. Is this really two projects or is it going to be one project? It will be one project. And part of that includes, we visited this issue with the Conservation Commission, is making a walking trail to the rear down across the property and across, and we will repair an existing bridge that the Hilton Hotel had over the small kind of, I use the term, there's not really a lot of water that flows in that brook area, but there is a bridge. We would repair that and interconnect the trail so that the parties over on the what would be the north lot, lot 6, but the north lot we're calling that now, would be able to have walking access, not using the roadway, right down to the clubhouse area that we show on the front of the southerly parcel. So those are some of the highlights of this. I'd like Austin, I know it's been a long night, I'd like Austin to take you through some of the other minor adjustments that we've made, but I just want to point out that the adjustments have been made to try and comply with CLD's comments. I don't believe that they're dramatic changes to what we've originally proposed. Thank you.
Good evening. For the record, Austin Turner with Bowler Engineering. What I'm going to do, I'll be brief, to summarize what we've updated since our last discussion. The plan updates that we've made have been revisions to accommodate the feedback we received from CLD, which we've responded to that letter and addressed those comments from wastewater group, as well as DPW and the engineering arm. The plans that we've submitted today are reflective of those changes. It also incorporates some of our discussions with the fire department relative to emergency access, which is probably the most substantive change, and that's the access to the northern part of the property, and I'll go through that. So of note is this area here. I'm just going to go from south to north. We've expanded this parking area a little bit, and really the impetus behind that adjustment was through our discussions with our neighbor, Mr. Mello, who's located here. There's, as you may recall our discussion, there's 59 spaces which are held in a non-exclusive easement. Through our discussions with Mr. Mello, he had indicated a desire for us to not include those spaces as part of our zoning assessment, which, to accomplish that, we've expanded this parking area here a little bit and have incorporated other spaces interior to the property, so that we've boosted our count while not requiring the use of those 59 spaces to do that. When I say the southern part of the project, I'm talking about this location here. The southern part of the project, as we had discussed previously in our January discussion, this part of the project has been designed to be compliant with the number of parking spaces that would be required as part of the town's ordinance. When we go over to the northern part over here, what we've done is provided a number of parking spaces that we believe is operationally appropriate based on our historical experience with similar developments and similar properties. As Mr. Michaels has stated, we could accommodate additional parking in this location to meet the town standards. The Conservation Commission had expressed a fairly strong desire for us not to include more impervious surface than we believe is appropriate. With that, we've provided a number of what we think is reasonable, but not excessively so. The biggest adjustment that we've accommodated here on the northern part of the property is a reconfiguration of the access driveway. And that was done through a meeting with the fire department. There was much discussion about how best to configure access to this property in the event that there was the need for emergency response. What we've done actually was a good suggestion from the fire department, was to expand the width of that driveway. What it incorporates now is a single 18-foot wide entry lane and a single 18-foot wide exit lane. It will be divided with a raised median, which will be landscaped with street trees and ground cover. What that does, in the event there's some kind of incident in that driveway, either in an inbound or egress lane, it gives them the ability to get in or out. And that median divider kind of prevents that barrier from something kind of going perpendicular to the driveway. So we believe that's a reasonable approach, and frankly, it's going to make for a more aesthetically pleasing entrance because it's going to be more of a boulevard than it will be just kind of your conventional entrance. We'll landscape that appropriately. Similarly, we worked out the the access to behind the structures for emergency response. Originally, we were considering more of a permeable material, like a grass paved system. In our discussions with the fire department, they'd request that we make that more of a conventional asphalt system, which we've done. And the grading and the stormwater program that we have incorporated into the revised documents is reflective of that conversion, where it would be a paved surface rather than a permeable surface. So we've upgraded the stormwater a little bit to accommodate that, but we think in our discussions with the fire department, that's an appropriate inclusion as well. As Mr. Michaels has mentioned, our discussions with the Conservation Commission, one of the items that they thought was of significance and important for us to accommodate was the direction of runoff associated with the entirety of the rooftops into our surface or subsurface infiltration systems. The plans that we have submitted here in response to that feedback are reflective of that condition, where rooftop runoff will be collected and conveyed to the infiltration systems prior to it being either recharged into the ground or released during some of the higher storm events. All in all, we believe that the comments that have been provided by your engineering peer review consultant, your respective departments, and emergency response personnel have made this a better project. The plans that you have in front of you and the plans that we're going to be reviewing tonight are reflective of that feedback in its entirety. We've provided letters which summarize our changes and how we've addressed those specific comments. But it's our belief that we've addressed those comments. And if there are any additional discussions that you'd like us to entertain or any additional detail that you'd like me to dive into tonight, I'm happy to do so.
We understand that the board isn't going to be taking action tonight, that the board would like to review plans, the butters would like to review plans. That's clear to us. I want to point that out to you. But we do appreciate being able to, again, highlight where we've gone. We've done our best to listen attentively to the abutters, to the board, I should say, as well as any of the consulting people. On that note, I'd like to have Jason Plourde come up and give you a brief update on traffic, because that is another kind of 800-pound gorilla that's been floating around this project for a while. And we've had some contact with the state, positive contact, and rather than me belabor the issue, I'd prefer to let him kind of update you on where we are with the signaling system and the improvements that we believe that we want to make. And I want to make one other note before he gets into this. There's been discussion about the crosswalk. In fact, it came up in one of your proposals tonight, the crosswalk. How do people get across the road? Continental Boulevard. Yeah, and I think it's important. People do walk back and forth across the road. There is an issue out there. And one of the things that we've spoken to Alan Mello about, and I know I contacted his attorney, Jerry Prunier, is that we believe that he's amenable to providing an easement for future sidewalk expansion along the front of his, where we would connect and bring it around on his property, that would help facilitate, notice what I've said, there it is, that would be the area that we're talking about, that would help facilitate interconnection to a point where it is potentially possible to create a pedestrian walkway across. We're working on that literally as we speak. It's not our land. We have no right to encroach on his land. But again, he's been cooperative. We're trying to work productively with him so that the project makes sense and can help satisfy some of the board's concerns regarding future utilization, if you will, by pedestrians of this area. Now I'm going to leave it alone because I think it's important. The state has commented on that in their report, and they've indicated that it would be possible to pull something like that together in the context of the traffic that we're talking about. Is it a perfect situation? No, it'll never be perfect. But is it something that may be workable? Yes, it might. So with that in mind, I think I'll turn it over to Jason. Thank you.
Thank you. Jason, go ahead.
Hi, good evening. Jason Plourde with Beta Group. Went through a lot of work with the DOT, that's for sure. We've got sign-off from the Bureau of Traffic on our traffic volumes, and we just got, and so that was based on a letter that they sent out on January 16th. And yesterday, the Bureau of Highway Design issued a memorandum that I've provided to both Robert and to Tim.
We just got this, by the way. I think it's dated the 5th. We just got it. This isn't something that we've had
Right.
for a period of time. So I apologize you haven't seen it. But again, you will be given the opportunity because, again, we're not trying to ask for final approval tonight. Thank you.
Right. So at least the town has a copy, and I'm sure that the board will get it handed to them.
What does it say?
It says that they have signed off on our off-site improvements. So now the next step that we're going through is now with the Bureau, going back to the Bureau of Traffic, and we're going to be preparing the traffic signal timing plans and phasing plans. So it's really just the technical review and acceptance at this point. So yeah, it was a big hurdle, I'll tell you. You know, they did a very thorough review, went back and forth with a lot of information. But yeah, they put their stamp of approval on it, so we can move to the next phase. And then after we're done with the Bureau of Traffic, then the Bureau of Turnpikes issues our permit.
So in those two reviews from the Bureau of Traffic and Bureau of Turnpikes,
Highway Design, I'm sorry.
I'm sorry, what?
Bureau of Highway Design.
Bureau of Highway Design.
Yeah.
In their communication with you, does it provide some of the detail of what they looked at and what they put in their review? I'm wondering if there's a usefulness to posting some of their work with our applicant so the public can see it and read it and understand it, or does it just say you're approved?
Oh, no,
signature
it's
from...
very detailed information. Very detailed information.
Okay, so terrific. I think that we ought to, since you've already provided it to the town, I think we'll sort of make arrangements for that to be posted and communicated in some of the same places where the videos were posted before of the traffic simulations and all that.
And they've said that, if I can read a quote from it, it says, the proposed signal coordination and peer-to-peer signal system should mitigate the traffic impact to the roadways in the vicinity of the development. So not only is it mitigating the impacts, it's showing an improvement over the no-build conditions, so that's the future conditions without the development and without these improvements. So it's definitely an improvement out there. And based on comments from the board, I've also been coordinating with Bureau of Highway Design on the pedestrian connectivity out there. That being a crosswalk out here. Oops. Look at me, Gosling, huh?
You killed it.
I killed it, man. I did. I can talk about it then. Oh, here it is.
That's it. Point to it with the laser.
Yeah.
How's it? You see this?
Yeah.
So, it's over there by the trees and the bridge.
Amherst Road with Executive Park Drive and Burger King driveway. That signalized intersection where we have there's no crosswalks out there today. And where we were talking about Mr. Mello's property and the potential sidewalk along his frontage, what we could do is we could potentially put in, here it is, thank you, Austin, a crosswalk along the northern leg of Amherst Road, cross the Burger King driveway. There's an existing sidewalk along the western side of Amherst Road that goes down to Continental Boulevard. Now, here's the tricky part, right? How do you get across Continental Boulevard? It's a multi-phased traffic signal. That means that you have the left turns going on Continental Boulevard and Greeley Street, you have the through movements going, and then Amherst Road and Camp Sargent Road go during different times. That's called a split phase because they're not going at the same time, they're going different phases. What we had proposed to the board was that there was an opportunity that when the Amherst Road southbound approach gets a green light, that pedestrians could cross because you have the channelized right turn lane that comes down Amherst Road onto Continental Boulevard. Then you have a left turn lane and a through lane. Once pedestrians can cross that channelized right turn lane, there's not going to be any conflict with pedestrians crossing if they can go during the Amherst Road phase. That means that there's through movements and left turns going, but they're not in conflict with anybody from Camp Sargent Road, Greeley Street, Continental Boulevard, or even the right turns from Amherst Road onto Continental Boulevard. It's just they're going to be able to cross while the through movements are going. One of the other suggestions that the Bureau of Highway Design had come up with was, how about an exclusive pedestrian phase? An exclusive pedestrian phase means that you stop all movements at the intersection. However, they've indicated that it's going to be a significant delay that would occur not just at this intersection, but at all of the other intersections that are tied into it. So they've recommended to the Bureau of Traffic, as we're going back to them with our traffic signal plans, that be investigated. So they are saying, we are interested in moving forward with this. We have not said no. We are not saying that there's any other alternatives. This is a good one to pursue. See what the Bureau of Traffic says while you put it into your plans. So that's where we are right now.
So the one that they want to pursue is the
one that I proposed to the board originally.
The coordinated one. Okay.
Yep. Yeah. So as far as the traffic signal systems, it's the same ones that we talked about before, where it's that new peer-to-peer system, responsive system, that would be at Executive Park Drive and Amherst Road, and then down at the Continental Boulevard. And did this shut off again?
Did it again.
You keep doing it.
and down at the Continental, Greeley, Amherst Road, Camp Sargent Road. And then we're going to have the coordinated traffic signal system that would be tied in with the northbound ramps and then at DW Highway. Okay. So it's going to be 1, 2, 3, 4 intersections that would be all tied in together.
So this cross of the northern leg of the Amherst Road, is that going to be taking advantage of the traffic light pattern that's already there, or would that have an exclusive pedestrian phase?
No, it would take advantage of that the existing phasing that's out there today, so that pedestrians would cross that northern leg when the Burger King and the Executive Park Drive get their permissive signal, meaning that they get a green light at the same time. So what they would be in conflict, the pedestrians would be in conflict with, would be people turning left from Burger King to go northerly and then ultimately westerly on Amherst Road, and the people that are turning right from Executive Park Drive to go northerly and westerly on Amherst Road.
Okay. So if the state various agencies are okay with the pedestrian treatment of the intersections, but this bit of sidewalk here is a proposed future development to be undertaken by the town whenever the town decides to build sidewalks or something like that. Are we putting in the pedestrian treatments at the lights initially, right from the beginning, even though the sidewalk doesn't lead to that intersection? Or
well, you don't want to put in a crosswalk that leads to nowhere.
That's the point.
Okay. However, the traffic signals will be the traffic signal systems, both of them, the peer-to-peer and the coordinated, would be able to accommodate those pedestrian crossings. It would be built into the computers that are going to be in the signal cabinets to be able to provide that opportunity.
We're working as best we can here. I mean, there are no other lights until you get down to the Premier Outlets, I don't think, on Continental. Is there another light?
No, there's not a light, but until you get out there.
So, this, at the end of the day, if there's going to be some pedestrian crossing for either the people on the, the northerly side of I say the northerly side kind of Continental, this may be an opportunity to try and provide something like that at some future time. So we're doing our best to work through it with you.
If Mr. Mellows agrees to offer up the easement, can that bit of sidewalk be part of the off-site improvements that you guys are undertaking?
I can certainly talk to the developer about that. We haven't gotten a formal letter yet from Mr. Mellows, so I can't. I don't want to comment on that right now. But we're doing our best to work toward this as best we can. But I don't think you're going to see sidewalk lights right away. I mean, the state may want to take a look at the peer-to-peer. They may want to take a look at how this whole thing is operating. I don't mean to speak for Jason, but we're doing the best we can to try and keep pulling toward that goal.
Their number one goal right now is to get the new traffic signal systems up and running so that we can clear out the cars that are queuing up between the signals. and then revisit the pedestrian crossings. I'm not saying whether it's on the town or the state or the developer. I'm just saying the process that they want to go through, that they want to make sure that the traffic signal systems work first. And then if we're going to be introducing the pedestrian phases into it, that can certainly be taken into account. But they don't want to kind of jump the gun until they know that the system's going to work.
I understand the logic of all of that, but it puts us in a position where there isn't an event where we will all come together and decide what to do with the pedestrians 3 years forward, and someone says, okay, let's all vote on it. I mean, it's sort of a part of this, or we're sort of hope and prayers that the state will make that kind of a change.
And given the state's track record on this particular part of town, I feel very uncomfortable.
No
The
comment.
the only thing we can say is that we'll do our best to continue to look at it. I just point out it's somewhat off-site for us, but I know the board has expressed concerns about this. Again, it came up tonight. I don't need to remind you again of the issue, and we're trying our best to at least implement something that may, be a positive for the town downstream if needed. That's about the best I can say at the moment.
I certainly appreciate the efforts, and I know that you guys have proposed developing sidewalks across all of your actual frontage all the way down to the movie theater. And I think about this development and where it is and why the zoning was changed to allow it over here to be that kind of almost mixed use, even though most of the other uses are off your site, but you're in with a bunch of commercial because people can get to them. And so, I think if you're moving into an apartment there's an appeal to say, hey, there's a way that I could get over to Shaw's and the other things that are over there without getting in my car.
And we've talked about this from day one. And we're as you can see, we're doing our best to address it.
No, you are. My only point was I think that it also adds value to your apartment complex to have that feature for people that might consider living there. So can you go back to the site plan and bring that up again? I just want you to point to a couple of things for me.
Thank you.
Sure. So the old bridge that's on the property behind where your buildings are going to be that you're going to repair, can you point to that? Because I know that it's always back there, but just actually...
So this little guy right here, that's the existing stairwell. And then that crossing, the existing bridge, is right about here.
Okay.
And so the proposal that we're going to do is that bridge obviously needs a little bit of TLC, so we're going to go and repair that and bring it back into an operating fashion. The commission had given us some good feedback in terms of how they wanted some of the guides and the handrails designed. So we'll incorporate that feedback, but that will ultimately allow us to do what we had talked about previously with the board, which is to provide... I'll show you.
Walking trail.
Kind of a walking path, and the width here isn't necessarily representative of what the width would be, but it's to facilitate this conversation.
Yeah.
We would have a trail, and we actually thought about it. The topography here is the most favorable in terms of facilitating that access, and it would come down and connect into thereabout where that bridge is today, where it would be repaired ultimately, and then have that connectivity interior amongst the property.
So I've read probably 6 different memos from the Conservation Commission in the last couple of days because they've been busy. On yours, on one of them, they talked about a bridge over a crossing and wanting it to be flat bottom so the animals and things that are used in the stream can still pass and it's not a round culvert. Was that yours that they mentioned that recommendation?
Yeah, that recommendation was both for that pedestrian bridge, which we can do. We'll work with the commission on that. It might require a pier or something just to cross that span. But similarly, it was related to this location here where our driveway goes in. There's a very, very narrow part of the brook that runs in here. Yep. So what we're working on is a structure. We actually provided some additional information about that structure in a package that we provided. It's going to be a bottomless arch span. So you're going to maintain the integrity of the native stream, and we'll span that and leave some shoulder on the outside so that it maintains that continuity without any physical alteration.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was after. Now, all of this is not just the Conservation Commission. You're going to have to get DES permits for all of
Correct.
this stuff, too.
We're working
including
on the
the
state
repair of the old bridge.
applications. Correct.
Have you had any feedback from them as to how receptive they're going to be to these kinds of things?
Yes. In fact, I was up in Concord last week, meeting with the state on a couple of different fronts, specifically about this project, and the feedback that we've gotten so far has been favorable. So we're working with them. We'll advance that, incorporate any feedback that they may have, but our first discussions were very, very positive.
Okay. Thank you for that. I've recently had a chance to talk with our police chief, Roy, about the extra police patrols that the council has approved related to not only this hotel, but hotels in general, to deal with crime. And part of our conversation was, as a planning board, what can we do to help the police do their job? And some of the discussions included thinking about parking lot lighting and distances that people have to walk from a building to the furthest point in the parking lot, and whether that's a lit way, whether there's some sense that a single individual would feel safe making that walk out from wherever the building is to the farthest point of the parking lot. And I don't know that sort of has gelled into specific requirements or instructions or things that we would be looking for, but I wanted to share that with you so you could think about that in terms of having an apartment building, especially this one furthest to the south. That extension of the parking lot from that building to the far end of that parking lot is in that one. You got people going quite a ways from their building. I don't know what that amounts to in feet, but I would guess it's probably a couple hundred feet away from the building to get to the furthest parking space that they might have to use. And I'd want to make sure that whatever we developed felt like it was safe and secure and somebody would be comfortable doing it. And if the police are out there trying to observe and patrol and make sure things are safe, that they've got the lighting and the site set up in a way that is suitable for what they want to do.
So the short version of that is we've done that, and we've modified our lighting program a little bit based on some of the feedback that CLD had provided. But we've done a comprehensive lighting program for this area, but also the entire site. And we're exceeding the minimum light levels, but not so much so that it's going to feel ultra bright or kind of like a car lot or something like that. But it's appropriately lit, and we've considered areas that might be a little bit further away from the building. In that same fashion, what we've incorporated down here is, I know we had talked about the connectivity again from the northern part of the property over to the southern part. This sidewalk exists, and you'll see these fancy little circles here. We've incorporated bollard-style lighting along that pathway so that it's illuminated. I didn't want to do big, tall pole mounts because I felt like that was a little bit extreme, but we have a number of bollard-mounted lighting in here, which similar style that we were done on the hotel property, just to provide some continuity there. But it's a good-looking product, and it will at least light that pathway as well.
I like that. Security cameras really don't fit with any of our regulations at this point, although maybe we'll revise them next time we get a chance. But providing security cameras so that you've got that same sense of reinforcement for that is probably a good thing to think about. I agree with the Conservation Commission and your proposal that the parking that's sort of, if needed, or drawn in gray up in what used to be buildings E or 6 or whatever we used to call that. I agree with the idea of not building that unless it's necessary or unless it turns out to be that there's a need there. I think that there's a lot of parking on the site already. I think there's perhaps even on the other half, on the number 4 Executive Park, there's more than you'll need, and I'd love to see more trees and grass and less pavement. And I understand the limitations you have with Mellow and the cross easements, but 100% agree with this of not building this and going without it.
Well, we could potentially put back the other one. I mean, we could potentially reduce that parking lot in the back. I mean, we that's there for you for your regs. I mean, we could do the same thing. I mean, that back area, I could get rid of those 7 or 8, 10 spots there, in that back area. I don't think we need those back there, and again, leave that more open. We can build it. Our drainage has been, but that site we've made it comply, even reserving the 59 spaces. Yeah. So I mean, we could tweak that a little bit. I don't think we're going to need all of that parking in that area. But again, we're showing it because under the regulations, we kind of have to. But it's something that I think the board could consider, because if we need to build it, we'll build it.
We have had more than a few applications where something like that was shown on the plan to be built in the future if needed, but not built as a part of the initial construction. So the reality is that the 59 spaces that are sort of the shared, that you're not counting in your equation, if your tenants are pulling in to park, they're going to park there, not way up in that thing in the corner. And so the thing in the corner is going to sit there empty.
Well,
unless Mr. Mello wants to have people walk from there to D'Angelo's, because they're going to your apartment complex people are going to park at the thing that's closest to wherever they are.
Look, it is what it is. We're doing our best to live by the sword, so to speak, and trying to protect an interest that he has. We could mark those if we needed to, but again, they're not exclusive. It was never intended, nor was it agreed to be exclusive. What we're doing is doing our best to preserve the integrity of that arrangement and also provide appropriate parking for our project.
Now,
but I hear
makes
you.
sense. That makes sense, and it's the right thing to do. I mean, subject to sort of, last time you were here, we went through the equations of parking and number of bedrooms and all of those kinds of things. But if you're proposing less parking and you've got sort of an explanation for why that works for you guys within our formula, I would be open to consider waivers of the parking requirements in this nature.
Well, as I pointed out, many, again, I try not to compare cities and towns, but Manchester, for instance, does not have a parking regulation this intense, and they get along quite well with the 1 and 2 bedrooms, which we're basically proposing. But, we had a long discussion at one of our meetings. There was a lot of concern about parking, which is what drove the bus to have me direct Austin put it on. But by the same token, the Conservation Commission picked up on it, and you saw their report. We didn't write it, they did. Yeah. And I'm telling you, we could do the same thing up in that westerly area.
I know that we've heard some testimony from some of the abutters who have an opinion about parking, and I want to make sure that you're not and nobody's parking on the street, and everybody that comes there has got some reasonable place to park and all that stuff. But as a general matter, my position is more trees, less parking.
And we're prepared to work with you in that regard.
Perfect. Thank you. I don't have any other immediate comments or questions about the proposal. Let me call on Paul and then go back to my normal seat.
Back to the lighting. I know I don't have a plan in front of me, but for that walking path up in the back, are you planning to have any lighting or a police call box or anything back there?
On the trail?
Yes.
We can work to do something there. I mean, the idea is that it still maintains some of that nature feel, but if there are certain provisions we can incorporate with working with police or fire, we're happy to look into that.
Okay.
Nelson?
Yeah, on the the to be built in the future if needed parking section that's up there.
Yes.
It isn't shown on this plan, but on the other plan, it seems to go into the buffer zone and come quite close to some of the residential housing there. I think we would want some kind of buffering or shielding or plantings that would protect those backyards.
We can show that, Nelson.
Please, thank you.
Yeah, I think there's sort of two parts to that analysis. I think that parking lots can get closer to the wetlands than a building can, and I forget what the exact definitions of what those lines are called, but there's sort of a no disturb where nothing can go, and then there's no construction. Separate from that, between the neighbors, but that doesn't mean that we can't ask for more or get more separation.
Well, you see, I guess that's a building setback. There is no buffer, I gather, in this property. This is a commercial property, and it's abutting residential.
So correct. And so what we've done is we've incorporated as large a buffer as is practical and reasonable to the properties to our, I guess it would be the west. And then similarly, so you're seeing this line right here.
Yeah.
That's a building setback.
Okay.
So obviously the buildings are well interior to the property, respecting that setback. These two lines here are wetland buffers. Yeah. The interior one is a 25-foot no disturb. The outer one is a 40-foot no building.
Yeah.
And we're respecting those as well. So we've kind of pushed this and compacted the footprint.
Yeah.
So it's appropriate but not egregious.
Okay, the thing that caught my eye was like where your number 23 appears there.
Here?
Those parkings are, yeah, I guess if that's a 40-foot, they're like 20 feet from the property line.
Correct.
And I think there should be some buffer protection in there for the houses.
Correct. And if in the unlikely event that we all collectively determine that those spaces should be constructed, we would agree to include some additional buffering in here by way of landscaping or screen fencing or a combination of both. We can do that. Right now, we don't anticipate it. The idea is to maintain the natural vegetation. But in some future event, we'd be amendable to a condition that requires
as long
that.
as it shows as part of the future build if needed.
Certainly.
Yeah. So far, nobody's gone back and built future build parking spaces on any of the
No,
plans
but
that we
just
you put that requirement on. Other comments or questions about the plan? Is there business that you want us to decide?
No,
decide on?
the only order of business is we'd like to keep moving with this and continue it to the 20th of February. And we're planning to get all of the information to Tim. I spoke to Tim Thompson the other day. He said that's up to the board, which it is. He said if we can get him our full plan set by the 9th, he can do his internal review on it. We'll be able to do that. I will tell you that.
I'd suggest that we've provided the full plan set, all the amended drainage report calculations are in that box right there.
But I just want to make that request because we'd like to, we've got some time frames we're working through, and we'd like to make that request to the board.
Yeah,
that's important to us.
I know that you do have those time frames. The indication I've gotten from staff is that our February 20th agenda's got a lot of stuff on it, and they'd prefer us to think about the next meeting, which is the March 6th?
Yeah.
6th?
5th or 6th. Yeah.
How much is that a difference for you between those couple of weeks?
It's important to us. We'd prefer to, that's why we've kind of kept these meetings going, because I think we've described a lot of this. I think once we get through the final review by the town and CLD, I think we're going to be very close. It may not take a lot of time. I don't mean to speak for any abutters, but it may not take that much time to finish this up. At least that's our hope.
I get that, and I understand that. I think that if we end up with an agenda that leads us late into the night, the board does have its own sort of approaches and policies that may make something that we don't get to by 10:30 something that we would continue. And having put something on the agenda and calling the abutters in to have their say on it, and then continuing it till March 6th anyway, because we've got a full agenda, is probably not as productive as just jump into the 6th in the first step. But
well, I just want to remind the board we were set back a little bit by the notification failure. And I don't mean to bring that up. We went past that. We weren't critical of it, but I just want to point out that's had an impact on our internal timing, and I don't want to need to say much more about it than that.
No, I agree, and certainly nobody is happy that we had that situation come up with the timing.
I think part of our sensitivity too is that we're going to have members of our ownership group here are not going to be available on the 6th. There's some medical complications that have arisen that are going to make that problematic, and we're not sure when the ultimate timeline is going to extend to for where they're not going to be able to participate. I know Mr. Michaels is going to be unavailable on the 6th and for some time after as well. So all of a sudden, if February 20th becomes March 6th or a date uncertain into the future, it could be significantly uncertain into the future for our collective team. And I think
we can do the 20th, but you may end up in the 6th anyway.
And
well,
all we can do is ask and see where.
I'd like to at least try that, and we'll see where it goes. I'd like to make that request.
One thing I want to just mention and discuss with the board, part of the staff's recommendation is not just that the 20th agenda is busy, but there is a lot to accomplish between now and then with getting a modified plan set submitted and getting CLD to review it. They've got a period of time where they're permitted to do that, which is 10 business days. Just that is almost the time between now and February 20th. If there's any hiccup in that process at all, we end up where we don't have a reviewed set of plans that we can sit down with, and we won't be in a position where the board can make a decision. The board gets its packages mailed to it the Friday before, so you're really talking about getting CLD comments and stuff done by the 17th or the 16th. It's a tight schedule to try to get all the things done that we want to get done in 2 weeks.
Plus all that's ahead of it, these other projects that are ongoing as well.
Yeah, all the people that are reviewing yours are also reviewing everybody else's. Let's, I don't know if the board wants to sort of dive deeper into that conversation now or let it sit for a second, but we haven't yet taken any public testimony tonight, and I want to make sure we always take our chance to do that. Do you want to discuss this idea of dates first, or just go to public? Okay. Give us a minute. Let's hear if there's any public or abutters who wish to weigh in. Thank you. Thank you. And with that, are there any abutters or citizens who wish to weigh in?
Hi, Dan Ricker, 12 Merrill Road, resident. Just a couple quick comments. You guys hit on most of them, but I just want to reiterate it for my own benefit. I just was curious if there was any plan to add a no turn on red on the corner of Greeley taking a right turn onto Amherst Road. I think that might be beneficial for keeping traffic in one spot on a red light. Maybe that's one of the reasons why there is stacking on Amherst Road, between Amherst Road and Continental.
So on Greeley going towards the outlet mall, if they're going to turn right towards this site, you want to have that be a no right on red?
Yes.
Man, I would hate that if that's I always go. Okay, we'll ask the applicant.
I don't know. I mean, I don't know if anyone's thought of that, but I mean, that's usually if you sit there and watch it, that's usually why a lot of that stacking occurs.
Well, it certainly
people taking
is
a right-hand turn trying to get there. So
yeah, I mean, certainly cars are turning right on red because that's where they're trying to get to. But usually, the reason why you would do a no right on red is because you're trying to preserve a pedestrian leg or something like that that's going across there. At the same time, the Greeley Street traffic is going, straight through, or the Camp Sargent Road traffic.
yeah, I mean, I feel like if you're on, let's see, if you're on Amherst Road at the Gulf Station going straight towards Amherst Road and it's a green light, people can still turn right on that red towards Amherst Road.
Right, but they're supposed to yield to that traffic from Camp Sargent Road.
Right. I get it, but I think a sign would maybe help that problem. Just a thought. Just a thought. Because if you're going to do the whole thing, you might as well do it right. And if that's, if DOT is going to put in the peer-to-peer thing, which sounds like they're going to do, which is great. What's one more sign to kind of keep traffic from going where they're not supposed to go?
I agree with the let's get it done while we're getting things done approach. I'm just not sure. I want to hear from the traffic experts whether they think that
Fair enough.
helps or is a favorable improvement to the intersection.
Just an observation. Just an observation that I don't know if it helps or not, but it's just when I'm sitting in there at the Gulf Station trying to go straight on Amherst Road, past D'Angelo's, and I see 12 cars go. It's just maybe it would help, maybe it wouldn't. Anyways, have we decided that the applicant is paying for this traffic improvements? Is that assumed, or has that been set in stone?
It is, but it isn't within our authority anyway. I mean, we can require that it get done. How it gets done, if the applicant can make the state pay for it, or the state makes the applicant pay for it, all we care about is it's got to get done before they get their plan signed.
So it's not a town paying for it. Like the town of Merrimack is not going to be fitting the bill for this improvement.
Not unless they go to the town council and get their approval for it.
Plus, it's not.
I don't think they'd get the vote, and it's not in our authority to do it.
And anyway, that bit of road is a state road, so the town probably couldn't do it even if we wanted to.
I was just trying to clarify. That's all.
No, I'm pretty. I think the applicant has said many times that it's at their cost. Should that change, it's really not up to us. But
it's a reasonable off-site improvement associated with this that we're required to pay for.
Okay.
Fair enough. Okay.
So the applicant, I know you weren't at a microphone, the applicants represented that it's a reasonable off-site improvement that they're required to pay for and willing to pay for.
Just one more quick thing. You mentioned a little bit about security and what's going on at the Woodland Springs Hotel. I mean, direct neighbors right there. I'm just curious if we can ask the applicant for a security plan. I know we mentioned lighting. I think Paul's got a great idea with some call boxes and things like that. Maybe even on some of the walkways near these parking structures and parking areas, as well as the path that leads through the property. I think that's important. I'd like to maybe have it signed off by the police, lieutenant or captain, whoever does that. I think that's important, and I know it's not their problem, but it kind of is if we're having issues with that hotel. It might bleed into their property. So I just think that's an important thing that we should take a look at.
I favor doing that too. We got to be cautious of what our regulations will allow us to do. When we've done that in the past, it's been in the context of a conditional use permit. So, for example, the marijuana dispensary has a security plan that we required of them, and security cameras and a whole bunch of other stuff. But that was a conditional use permit, which was a special regulation that had to be adopted just to allow the thing in the first place.
I think it's something to take a look at. I think it's something that it was probably unforeseen 6 months ago, and now it's come to our attention, especially if the chief of police is requiring.
I agree with you 100%. And my intention is that when we get our chance to review our regulations and consider what to do, that perhaps on large retail developments, security is a part of something that starts to appear on plans.
And just one more final thing. The Merrimack Outlets building with the Fairfield Inn, that property, that I think it was Gordon or Gordy that was
Gordon,
here.
yeah.
Anyways, he had a tax slide that showed the net revenue for the town.
Uh-huh.
I was just curious if we can have the applicant provide that to the town as well.
That's another element of those conditional use permits, where our regulatory reach allows us to examine that.
Okay.
So a conditional use permit is where the rules are sort of opened up to where an applicant can master plan a property like the outlet malls or the thing that's going to be at the bottom of the foothill of the outlet malls. And there's a couple of others around. When someone comes forward with that, it's got a lot of elements like mixed use and commercial plus residential and all of that. And some of the elements of that open up the door for this examination of financial impact and security plans and architectural designs and all sorts of things which are not part of our ordinary review.
Right. I think based upon the numbers that Gordy provided, I think the public would be Gordon, sorry.
I've never known him to go by Gordy.
Sorry.
I'm sure he wouldn't be offended, but
I feel like, the size of that project being, $40+ million and getting a net impact of around $600,000, and then a project like this, I don't know the total value, but I feel like the public is probably going to be a little bit surprised about how much tax will actually be given to the town. Just a thought.
It could well be. And there isn't necessarily something in our regulations that would allow them to do the kind of financial analysis that we require in the conditional use permits. But I know from past experience and past contact with this property that back in the day when this was an operating hotel, its assessment was something in the $9 or $10 million range, and that's steadily gone down as the hotel was inactive and the property was less used and all of that. And so a lot of things have come and gone. There certainly will be a substantial tax paid by the development of these properties, as well as there has been by the Wood Springs Hotel.
Yeah, I think
whether it matches up to what the costs are is the analysis.
Yeah, I think there was a comment on an email last time about it's better to get taxes instead of a pile of dirt, something along those lines. I don't know the exact wording of it, but
something that was sent to us, or just something you saw?
Something that was sent to you guys. Like it was for the project because they feel like it's better to get taxes for the town instead of looking at a pile of dirt or an open lot or whatever. And I don't know where it is, and that's why I like to see it, because I think that there might be people might think you might be getting a lot more than you think is actually coming in, and so that pile of dirt may be not too far off from actual taxes to the town. That's all.
Sure.
That's all I'm thinking of.
Since we don't really have the ability to impose on the applicant to do the kind of analysis we do with conditional use permits, I'm sort of wondering in my mind whether we can think of where we could find some analogy to some other property that pays their taxes and is roughly the same size and value. I'm not sure where to think, because certain ones that are condominiumized, you don't have one bill that you could go look up and see, what does Society Hill pay for taxes.
I mean,
so it's a tough one to figure out.
Is it possible to just consult with the town assessor? I mean, that person should be able to come up with a number.
The applicant, once you're done, when we close the public hearing, I think the applicant's got something to say.
Perfect.
On that,
That's all I got.
on that. So we'll follow up and see what we can find out more.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dan. Other abutters or citizens who wish to weigh in? None others tonight? Okay, close the public hearing and
No, I'll just mention it.
come back to a microphone.
Come to a mic, yeah.
The folks at home want to hear your thoughts too.
We did take a look at the tax side of this thing. Not that it's totally relevant to this, but we believe it'll be about a $400 million project, producing somewhere in the neighborhood of $600,000 to $750,000 in revenues. It's a fairly significant. You can see it. I don't need to tell you that. So if you're looking for, and I'm not saying that's it, because we're not the assessors, and we're not the rate setters, but it's a pretty substantial amount of money.
Thank you for that. You guys can come back to the table because we're done with the public hearing. So we'll figure out what the rest of our discussion and business is for tonight.
I just wanted to address the.
Doesn't say.
I just wanted to address the comment about the no turn on red sign on Greeley Street. That is not part of the proposed improvements. There are already some signs out there for do not block intersection, but well, and I saw that. Yeah, and I see that there's been some comments here and there about how the police have been enforcing it lately, so that's been good.
Yeah, the police did go out after
yeah.
our last meeting, and they did
Right.
enforce the don't block the intersection.
That's right.
And talk to them about how often can they get out there. I mean,
right.
With the number of police officers that we have in town, do we want to take all of the ones that are on patrol and plant them at that intersection for the afternoon or the evening?
Right, and and one of the big things with people being more aggressive while they're driving is because they're getting sick of waiting in traffic, right? So you're going to block the intersection, you're going to go through, a red light, or you're going to turn right on red when you're not supposed to. Well, in this case here, as far as the improvements that we're looking at to implement, and the biggest thing is to reduce those queuing, between the intersections. So, I think that the progression is going to be certainly improved out here, and there's not going to be a need for the no turn on red sign. And Mr. Chairman, you're absolutely right. There are certain times when the no turn on red signs are needed, and one of them is for the pedestrian crossings. Absolutely right. Another one is that if you have buildings that are built right up to the corners of intersections, you can't see oncoming cars. That's another one. But we don't have that situation here.
Thank you. Thank you for those comments. Other comments or questions by members of the board about the information presented by the public or otherwise?
Mr. Chairman, I have to say that I'm a little upset to learn that any introduction of pedestrian crossings into the system is going to be delayed and be left over to the Department of Transport. I think that's a worrying feature because I have a horrid feeling it'll never come. We've had enough problems. I mean, I don't wish to belabor it, but when we go back to the original plans of developing the Shores site, we agreed certain things with the Department of Transport which were never, they were effectively provided in the signalling system, but they never would agree to use them. And I'm very worried that we get ourselves into the situation that we have a wonderful system, and I think it will be one, as Jason has described. But if we cannot get the department, or whichever highways, or whoever the hell they all are, to agree at an early stage that the pedestrian thing is going to be incorporated, we'll end up with them finally saying, well, we're going to stop the whole traffic so that pedestrians can cross. And if you've ever watched that happen, and there's plenty of them on Amherst Street, you get little kids pushing the button,
and the whole traffic system stands station. And if you want to go and look at where they put in, where Airport Road crosses Amherst Street, that has been, it's a great system, but it's ended up as a disaster because of the amount of time that pedestrian crossing system blocks the whole thing up. So all I can do is say, I'm worried when I hear that. I'd like to see us get strong-armed a little bit with the Bureau of Turnpikes, the Highway Department, DOT, whoever, because I worry it'll never get done.
I can only say that they are looking at it.
Well, that's all I can ask. Attorney Michael, can you lean on them very heavily?
The second paragraph that you will see of the February 5th letter, we just got it, I mentioned it, is devoted to this issue.
Good, great.
So
I look forward to reading it.
It's not you'll see it's not perfect the minute you introduce pedestrians. There could be some additional delays. That's no secret. That's not something that is a surprise to anybody. But I want to make it clear that it's the second point in their letter, because we are addressing it and doing what we can. And as Jason pointed out, I'm repeating myself, I apologize, the signaling system, the peer-to-peer, the improvements that we're going to make to the system will accommodate it. But again, it's a state issue. You know that, and I know that.
Yeah.
I know that.
And it was the same with the Shores.
I'm just saying, we've done our best to take a close look at this.
Great. I'm not complaining, Attorney Michael. I'm not complaining with the efforts of you and your team. I'm just bothered. I'm making a statement as a general.
You're pontificating a little. That's okay.
I'm allowed.
That's okay.
Yeah, all right.
I have no problem with that.
Thank you.
So I don't want to pontificate. I support the pedestrian traffic. I think, to me, you've already said all that needs to be said with respect to the communication with the DOT and what they choose to do and what they support is, I think, it'll be whatever it is. The one that I think that is more in your control and I want you to focus on is the easement on Mr. Mello's property and then considering whether that sidewalk can actually get built as a part of the off-site improvements. Because I think that if it's not built and it's sort of left, then the argument is, well, let's not have the crosswalk on Amherst. And if we don't have the crosswalk on Amherst, then why would we have one on Continental? And the whole thing sort of starts to unravel in terms of pedestrian access if that bit of sidewalk doesn't get built. And I know that one is not necessarily 100% in your control because it's on somebody else's property, but assuming the easement comes about, the ability to pay for that, get it built, is within your control more. And I think that you get some benefit, a beneficial view from this board if you succeed in the pedestrian thing. It doesn't mean that you can't get approved without it because some of it's out of your control, but why not get all of the juice you can out of the potential for your proposal by having this problem figured out and solved too? Are there more comments or questions about any of that stuff? Nelson?
Yes. First of all, I'd like to second everything that Alistair said and you have said with regard to including, especially with regard to including pedestrian access through this. And I'm not sure that I could approve it if it does not include a way of getting people across there safely. So the state has got to do what they've got to do, but the pedestrians are part of this intersection, and I think putting it off and saying we'll do it in the future or we'll try it and see isn't going to work for me. I just want to make that comment now. Thank you.
Other comments or questions? All right, so the applicant's looking for a continuance to February 20th, and we've got the potential that the staff would rather see us aim for March 6th, and there's some pros and cons on both sides of both dates. What's the will of the board?
Mr. Chairman, all I could say is I understand that what the Attorney Michael has said and what his team have said, but we do know that the project for the bottom of the outlet mall is already on the agenda. And there's a risk, obviously, that a thing could drag on. If they're prepared to take a gamble that we don't run into the 10:30 blockade or not been able to continue the whole process because of that 1030 blockade. That's a gamble. I think that the applicant should be allowed to make that gamble and make that decision for themselves and not rely on us.
I think they're also making the gamble for all the abutters who might want to come out and sit here till
I
10:30.
understand that problem. I do understand the problem.
Anyway, was that a motion?
No, it was a comment.
Is anyone interested in making a motion with respect to the continuance?
All right.
I'll make him.
Mr. Chairman, I make a motion that we agree continue this project, this thing until February the 20th with no further notice to the abutters, on the clear understanding that we made it only doing it at the specific request of the applicant.
Understood. Is there a second for Alistair's motion?
I'll second.
Lynn has the second for it. If there's no further discussion, all in favor of continuing to February 20th, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstaining?
Thank you.
So that is 6-0-0. We'll see you.
Any abutters call the office?
We're giving him your cell phone
Direct
number.
them to Greg.
Give them.
Good night. Thank you. But thank you for
gentlemen.
everything you presented today.
Thank
a lot
you.
of positives.
There's good news there. Yeah.
Yes, I think that you did present quite a bit of new information that's responsive to what we've asked for and asked about. That brings us, Dan's back on our board. We're ready to discussion and possible action regarding other items of concern. The one that I would bring up and kind of expand on is what I mentioned during this applicant's presentation, and that is a discussion with our police chief about what approach the planning board might take to update our review of certain kinds of retail sites to take into account the facts of life a little bit better on security. It isn't something that needs any kind of immediate discussion here, but I think that when we get to the point of looking at some implementation of the master plan and how that will affect our site plan and subdivision regulations, there may be a chance to build some of those kinds of things
I
in.
think alerting her and having her think about it so that she'd have thoughts prepared for us.
Yeah, if she could involve herself in any discussion, I think that'd be a very good idea.
Now, Chief Roy wasn't critical of anything that we had done in the past, and initially in the discussion thought that, this was not necessarily something the planning board could solve, but I think exploring some specifics revealed that there may be some things that we could do a little bit better job of on the security front. Let's see, any other items of concern? It seems like I'm forgetting something that I
Just repeat the Saturday morning's outing.
Saturday site walk on the 10th of February at 9 o'clock at 10 Premium Outlets Boulevard, the bottom of the hill. In addition to walking that site, I plan to take the opportunity to ride around through the neighborhood and take a look at what it looks like from that view too, if there isn't a chance to walk through the neighborhood.
Where the fire lane meets
Yeah.
the normal road.
Is there a place to park there?
The fire, you can kind of pull onto the
You can
fire
go
lane
down the fire lane.
and park without blocking it.
You're talking the end on Outlet Boulevard, not the end on Camp Sargent.
Correct.
Oh, yeah.
Internal to the site. Nelson.
Yeah, I had one more thing, Mr. Chairman. I spoke with Timothy Thompson this week regarding the comments that we, as a planning board, were going to give to the NRPC regarding their proposed approach on this sidewalk Route 3 plan. He said he had sent in the comments that I had prepared, and that these were the only comments he had received. So they have them. I'm sure that other comments would still be welcome if possible, but we're going to move forward, I think, next on this subject with planning for a booth anyway, or a table at the elections on the 10th of April. So just FYI, board members, if you still have any ideas, if you care, there it is.
Thank you for that. I can also offer an update from a conversation I had with Tim Thompson about implementation of our master plan and where things stand with that. And Tim has got a focus now on taking a look at our subdivision and site plan regulations, which is now one combined document, and figuring out whether it makes more sense to have site plan and subdivision as separate sets of regulations. It seems to be that's what occurs in a lot of other places. And Tim's approach to that seems to have a lot of logic to me. It also opens up the door to making lots of revisions to both of those things, which check a whole bunch of boxes in our obligation to implement our master plan. So that's what I have in terms of an offer, and I'm sure that Tim would explain that better if he was here, and maybe we'll catch him next meeting. But I wanted to share that with you, just because we haven't had any work sessions.
I don't think you'll be catching him till the budgeting season is over.
Perhaps so. Tim works hard, though. He's definitely an
does.
asset to our efforts. Any other items of concern? Then we've got a set of minutes here to approve, and as soon as I figure out when they're from, we'll...
January the 16th.
January 16th, 2018. What's the will of the board? A motion to approve as printed by Lynn.
I'll second that.
Second by
I
Alistair.
think Nelson's got some...
I've got a couple.
Bring them forward. Let's have
Okay. On page 4 of 13, line 4, which begins, the board voted 7-0-0 to grant the application. I think it should say grant final approval to the application, since that was what the motion was. This was the final approval.
Grant conditional final approval to the application.
Insert final approval to after the word grant.
Yeah.
And then the next comment I had was on page number 11, and this is line 2. We're talking about Nelson Disco corrected Chairman Best that the people voted, and then it says voted for the ordinance changes at town meeting. Well, actually, I said more than that. So I said the people voted for the original ordinance, that was later modified by the town council, and then this particular proposal was had some variances added to it. So there's 3 steps to get to where we are approving. This is in response to Mr. Mills' comments. Remember, he said, well, you guys did this, and I wanted to correct him. It wasn't you guys. We did
you guys.
That's right. The original was voted by the people. The original concept was voted by the people. Then, at the suggestion of the planning board, then it was modified by the town council, and then it's been further allowed by variance on this particular site to allow this to go on such a small site.
Can I impose on you, Nelson, to submit all of that correction in writing to the department, or
I could do that.
Or Robert, you got it all set?
No, but please send me that how you want it written.
I shall do so.
You said
going
that-
on.
You said it was further modified by the town council?
Yes.
Has to be legally.
How so?
The council, at one point, there was a change to this is to the PUD, or the,
CUP.
What? CUP ordinance that allows the CUPs. And this was modified probably 3-4 years ago, 5 years ago, when we took what was in the ordinance and we made some changes to allow it to go to smaller lots. The original one had larger lots, and there was another major change in it, which I'll have to...
When we stopped putting the zoning ordinances on the ballot, the town council started making those decisions, and that's what...
Yeah.
So the planning board
Yeah,
made recommended...
I just didn't recall that. Maybe I wasn't on the council at that
It
time.
might have been before your time, Tom.
Well,
at least way back at
Between
the
the
beginning.
times.
Between
He was
my
on,
time.
then he was here
In a
as
gap,
the planning
yeah.
board, and then he went back to the council.
Okay, thanks.
Okay.
Understood. Do you have any other minutes changes?
No, that's all. Thank
Okay,
you.
so you'll submit those in writing
I
to
will submit those in
Robert?
writing with the caveat that I'm going out of town for a week. but I'll get them to him. Okay.
Excellent. Okay. So,
All in favor?
we have a motion and a second
Yeah.
with some changes. All in favor of approving the minutes of January 16th as amended, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstaining? 700 to approve those minutes. That concludes the business on our agenda
Mr. Chairman, I
tonight.
make a motion that we adjourn.
Is there a second? Second by Paul. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstaining? Thank you all. We're adjourned, 700. Don't forget to turn your microphones off.